"Shut your mouth, or they'll destroy you right here," Zara shouted, her hands trembling as she covered Marcus Hale's mouth inside the luxury car. The white cops laughed hysterically outside the door, treating both the CEO and the child like entertainment. But they had no idea the bloodied punch to Marcus's face would ignite public outrage, and Zara would become a symbol of resistance. Truth could be distorted, but in the end, only courage could save a person. Even the most rotten, decayed officers would pay a price they never saw coming. Marcus Hale had just shut the car door and hadn't yet reached for the seatbelt when a small hand suddenly pressed tightly over his mouth. The touch was soft but impossibly firm, making him freeze, eyes wide as he looked around the back seat. In front of him was a small face, bright black eyes staring back at him. Her breath was fast, her skin sun-kissed, her hair slightly messy. Everything about her spoke of a life far from easy. But what stunned Marcus most was the gaze, equal part fear and resolve, so unlike the panic of a typical child. "Be quiet, they're watching you out there," Zara Collins whispered, her voice trembling but firm. The words sliced through the arrogance Marcus wore, like a second skin. He was used to deference, to people falling silent the moment he spoke. And yet now, a stranger, a little girl, was commanding him, right inside his private car, his supposed safest space. Marcus started to react, to push the small hand away, but her eyes made him pause. They held urgency, something he couldn't name. Through the window, he caught the shapes of 3 men in police uniforms. Their movements weren't hurried but slow, predatory, hunters, approaching a cornered target. A chill ran down Marcus's spine. Before he could speak, a coarse voice seeped through the glass, dripping with contempt. A billionaire CEO sitting with trash? The cruelty was blatant, tearing through the sheen of prestige Marcus always wore, reducing him to something small in an instant. He shifted for a clearer look and saw Officer Grant's face close to the glass, a crooked grin beneath eyes full of spite. Beside him, Miller and Doyle wore sneering smiles, like actors settling into the first act of a play where Marcus was cast as the fool. Marcus clenched his fist, heart pounding. Never had he imagined himself in a situation like this. A man who commanded thousands, who held power in his grasp, is now silenced by a little girl and surrounded by 3 officers. Everything was happening too fast, too absurd to process. Why was this girl here, in his car? Why was she telling him to stay quiet? And why were those men in uniform speaking to him with such vicious disdain? Zara kept her tiny hand over his mouth, her wide eyes glowing with sharp awareness. Marcus heard nothing but the thunder of his own heartbeat and the heavy footsteps approaching the car. The scent of new leather mixed with Zara's anxious sweat, forming a stifling air. In that moment, Marcus felt that he had lost control. The one thing he believed would always belong to him. Grant knocked hard on the window, his eyes a mix of mockery and threat, while Miller murmured a low laugh to Doyle, as if they were about to witness a rare piece of entertainment. Marcus realized silence was no longer a choice, but a matter of survival. And bitterly, that command came from a stranger, a little girl whose name he didn't know, whose past was a mystery, but who, in this fleeting moment, might be the only one holding his chance to stay alive. Marcus glanced at Zara again and saw her small hand trembling, but her soft voice came through with firm clarity. "Trust me, don't say anything." The words weren't a plea, but an urgent instruction, as if she knew exactly what was coming. The anger that would have been his instinct was locked down. He understood now that his usual arrogance, his habit of control, if unleashed at this moment, could turn into a bullet aimed at himself. And so, the second he surrendered to that tiny hand, swallowing every word of protest, he unknowingly triggered a chain of events unlike anything he had ever imagined in his life. Outside the glass, Grant sneered again, his voice hissing. "Let's see if money can still save a CEO like you today." And in Zara's eyes, Marcus saw a reflection of himself not as a man issuing command, but as prey being hunted. A sudden bang shook the entire luxury car. Officer Grant, his face flushed red and eyes filled with hostility, slammed his baton straight against the window. The loud thud echoed through the cabin, jolting the whole vehicle. Marcus flinched and turned instinctively, but Zara's small hand gripped his sleeve tightly, signaling him to stay silent. Outside, Grant bared his teeth, spitting out each word as if tearing flesh. "Open the door, you arrogant, rich bastard." His tone wasn't just a command, it was a slap across Marcus's dignity, a man who had lived his life being respected, now addressed with raw contempt. Zara whispered close to his ear, her voice trembling yet steady, "Don't speak, they'll twist it against you." The words landed like a truth Marcus hadn't yet recognized. He opened his mouth, ready to argue, but the girl's eyes flashed with urgency, stronger than fear. For the first time he stood between 2 poles, his instinctive arrogance and the warning of a child. That moment unsteadied him, and for the first time, Marcus felt forced to obey a voice so small. The car door rattled again as Officer Miller shoved in beside Grant, shouting hoarsely, "You think a CEO like you can buy justice?" He said it loud enough for passers-by to hear, making sure Marcus's humiliation spilled beyond the car and onto the street. Each word was not a question but a pre-written sentence. "Money won't save you today." In Miller's eyes, Marcus saw a cold hatred, a feeling born not from justice, but from the pleasure of dragging down someone above him. A raspy laugh burst from Doyle, standing just behind his two partners. He bent over, laughing hard, eyes gleaming with mockery. That sound tore through the car's interior, hammering the divide between skin color and status, deepening the contrast between a poor black girl and a multi-million-dollar CEO. In that moment, Marcus no longer felt like the man in power, but an object they had chosen to ridicule. He clenched his fist, chest rising and falling, burning to shout, but Zara's eyes held him back. Silence now felt like degradation. Grant struck the window again, this time so hard the glass visibly shuddered. "Are you deaf?" I said. "Open the door." His voice came out thick and coarse, like an invisible verdict. Marcus tilted his head, sensing with painful clarity the thin line between freedom and humiliation. If he spoke up in protest, everything would be twisted into evidence against. If he stayed silent, he would be seen as a coward in their eyes. In this situation, there was no perfect. Zara took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. She leaned in closer and whispered, "They want you to lose it, so they can edit it, twist it, make you the criminal." The words sent a chill down Marcus's spine. He had never imagined that he, a man who controlled an entire financial empire, could be cornered so completely that he had to take orders from a girl not yet 10 years old. But there was something in Zara's voice that made it impossible to dismiss. Carried the weight of someone who had lived under oppression, who knew exactly how the game was played by those with dirty power. Miller hissed through clenched teeth. "I'm asking you one last time, Hale. You think you're any different from the beggars on the street? Same skin, same garbage in my eye." Laughter burst again, and Doyle echoed him, dragging each word down like a hammer meant to crush the air inside the car. The insult wasn't just aimed at Zara, it pulled Marcus down with her, making him a prop in their performance of hatred. Rage surged in him, begging to be released, but that small hand gripped tighter, and Zara's eyes locked on his, full of fear, pleading, commanding, "Please, don't." Marcus's entire body trembled, from a shame he had never known, and from a conflict he had never faced. He was used to strategy, to million-dollar boardrooms, to decisions that made thousands bow. Now, a child held his fate with just 2 words: stay quiet. The truth of it made him feel strangely small. Outside, Grant looked around and noticed a few curious bystanders stopping to watch. He raised his voice immediately, as if performing for the street. "See that? Sitting in a car with a little black girl, too scared to even open his mouth. Just a paper CEO, all money, no spine." His words landed with aimed at stripping away every ounce of Marcus's public image. Another round of laughter followed, sharp and cruel, cutting deep into his pride like blades. Marcus clenched his fists, grinding his teeth, blood rushing to his face. He wanted to snap, to pound the glass, to scream every word back at them, but Zara's eyes stayed locked on him, trembling yet steady. That strange combination made him stop. In those eyes, Marcus saw not fear, but something more urgent, a plea that if he spoke, they would both be destroyed. The officers outside kept closing in, their laughter and jeers echoing louder, pressing him into a corner with no way out. And in that moment, Marcus Hale, the man who had never bowed to anyone, chose silence for the first time. A bitter silence, but the only way to protect both their lives and a truth still buried. In the car, thick with tension, Zara slowly pulled her trembling hand away from his mouth, her eyes still fixed on the door being pounded from outside. She whispered once more, her voice low and sharp as a blade, "Stay quiet. This is just the beginning." The sharp clang of metal rang out as the car door was flung open, tearing down the fragile barrier of safety inside. Grant reached in and grabbed Zara's arm, yanking her out, as if she were a lifeless sack. Her small body was dragged across the rough pavement, knees slamming into the blistering asphalt, blood seeping out and trailing behind her. Zara fought to hold back a cry, but the pain, tangled with fear, blurred her vision. The sight ripped through the tight silence Marcus had held in his chest. He shot up, shouting, voice hoarse with fury, "Are you insane? She's a child!" It wasn't just a protest. It was the roar of a cornered animal. For the first time in his life, Marcus felt truly powerless. But his scream carried no weight, only seemed to delight the officers. Doyle, still lingering behind his partners, smirked with a look of pure disdain. He spoke in a flat, venomous tone, "She's not your kid. Mind your own business." The words landed like a punch to Marcus's gut. In Doyle's mockery was a brutal message. He had no right to intervene, no claim to protect, and every protest only made him look more pathetic. Marcus clenched his fist, feeling the blood surge to his face, his throat tight with rage. He couldn't swallow. But before he could act, Zara's scream cut through the air, drawing startled glances from people on the sidewalk. "You're the ones breaking the law!" The words came from a child, yet carried a weight Marcus had never heard in any boardroom or courtroom. Zara's voice didn't shake. It sliced like a blade, exposing truth with terrifying clarity. In that moment, Marcus felt a force greater than any title or power. Truth didn't need armor. It was there in every drop of blood on Zara's knee, in her red, defiant eyes that still burned with resistance. Grant tightened his grip on her shoulder and barked, "Shut up!" then yanked her upright, forcing her to face the street where a few onlookers had started to gather. Miller laughed loudly and said for all to hear, "A little black black brat mouthing off to cops? That's comedy. Doyle joined in, their laughter echoing across the sidewalk, a brutal reminder of who still held control. But in that instant, Marcus saw the shift. The people had seen. They had heard Zara's scream. The abuse the officers tried to hide had instead been exposed in full view. Marcus stepped out of the car, unable to stay seated any longer. He could still taste blood on his lip from the earlier punch, but it didn't matter now. He moved forward, his eyes sharp, his voice low and heavy. Let her go. You're crossing the line. His words rang out, no longer trembling, but resolute. Grant turned toward him, looked him up and down, and gave a crooked grin. The line? We draw the lines. You're just the fool who walked into our territory. Doyle cut in, his voice sharp like a blade. You know how people like you usually end up when they piss off the cops? One fake report, a couple of fake witnesses, and that's it. He paused, looked at Zara, then at Marcus, and let a wicked smile spread across his face. And no one's going to believe an arrogant CEO and a little black orphan. Marcus heard each word fall like the sound of nails, sealing the coffin of his reputation. But instead of fear, something ignited inside him. He understood now that he wasn't just fighting for himself, but for the child who had just been dragged across the pavement, her knees bloodied, and had still dared to scream the truth. He stared directly at Grant, speaking through clenched, "If your justice is a lie, I'll make sure the world sees it." Zara, still restrained, had eyes shining but unbroken. She yanked at the arm being held, her gaze fixed on Marcus. In that moment, they shared a silent understanding, as if fate had already decided they were on the same side. And right then, a few bystanders raised their phones, cameras aimed at the scene. The ones who thought they held control suddenly became unwilling actors on a public stage, and the story slipped out of their hands. Grant noticed the watching eyes and clenched jaw, gripping Zara harder, but that only made the image clearer, a burly cop assaulting a child. Doyle started to step forward, but Miller raised a hand to stop him, muttering, "Let's see how long this CEO holds up." He wanted to stretch the moment, to bury Marcus in humiliation before delivering the final blow, but that arrogance would become the spark for a much bigger explosion they hadn't anticipated. Marcus, though shaking with rage, focused. He looked at Zara and saw her lips pressed, blood still dripping from her knee, but her spirit unshaken. That resilience gave him a strength he had never known. He took another step forward, voice loud and firm, directed at Grant and the others. "You can't hide the truth. Everyone here has seen it today." The words weren't just protests, they were a declaration, and they marked the turning point. From a CEO silenced in his own car, Marcus Hale had stepped out, ready to face them, no longer afraid of batons or laughter. At the same time, Zara shouted again, throat raw, "You will pay for this." Her voice rang out over the street, joining the eyes of the crowd and the lights from recording phones, becoming living proof the police couldn't erase. In that suffocating moment, quiet battle had begun, fought with guns, but with words, blood, and images. And from the shadows they were pulled from, Marcus and Zara had unknowingly begun a journey that would change their lives forever. Doyle's loud laughter hadn't even faded when Miller reached into his pocket and pulled out a compact handheld camera, the kind typically used during field check. He pressed the button, the red light blinked on, and he pointed it straight at Marcus and Zara like an invisible weapon. He gave a thin smile, voice raised just enough to drown out the city noise. "Make sure we get the CEO resisting nice and clear." Every word landed like a blade in the air, aimed not just at Marcus, but at his image, his dignity, and his entire life. Marcus froze in that moment. Never had he imagined that he, a man in control of billions, would become a puppet in a play staged by men wearing badges. He saw it clearly. The setup was complete, the script already written, and he was now the unwilling lead cast for public humiliation. He swallowed hard, throat dry, muscles tensed with fury. Images flashed in his mind, major conferences, formal speeches, places where one sentence from him could move market. And now, one wrong word, one poorly timed scowl, and they would twist it into a crime for the camera. Grant didn't miss a beat. He stepped forward, baton raised to Marcus's chest level, eyes gleaming like a predator. He spoke in a low, slow growl, dragging each word. "Say one more word, I'll make you a criminal." Every syllable coiled around Marcus like a chain, locking him in place. Grant didn't need truth, didn't need evidence, just one flinch, one shout, and the lie would be sold as fact. Marcus looked around and saw a few bystanders quietly recording with their phones, flared and quickly dimmed when he realized how Grant had positioned himself, blocking most angles and distorting the footage. In his life, Marcus had faced countless negotiations, could smell deceit a mile away, but never had he felt the filth and venom so vividly. This wasn't business, it was brute power paired with manipulation, built crush and distort. Just as Marcus opened his mouth to respond, Zara yanked his arm, her small eyes glowing with both terror and unshakable resolve. Her voice rasped out, harsh but certain, "Stay quiet, or we both lose everything." The words hit like nails into concrete, forcing Marcus to swallow every syllable. This child in front of him, small enough to tremble with the breeze, was somehow the only one reading the situation for what it truly was. She knew the game these officers played, knew exactly how they would spin everything to make him the villain. Marcus looked down at Zara and saw blood still seeping from her knee, soaking into the dusty ground. Sweat dotted her forehead, but her eyes remained as sharp as steel. For a moment, he felt as though he was learning a bitter lesson from a child. Some battles aren't won by speaking up sometimes. Silence is the only shield that can protect both life. Grant twirled his baton and tapped it lightly against his palm, staring straight at Marcus with a shameless grin. "Look at you, a multi-million-dollar CEO, silent in front of a kid and 3 cops. Where's the spotlight now? Where's the power?" He was humiliating Marcus on purpose, turning him into a public joke. Miller kept the camera rolling, making sure every frame could be weaponized later to destroy a man. Doyle chuckled dark, adding cruel words of his own, even calling Zara names Marcus had never heard before. The air thickened, like a trap snapping. Marcus felt as if he were standing on a wire, and one wrong move would send everything crashing down. He didn't know how to keep his balance, didn't know what else to do but follow Zara's lead. He gripped her small hand tightly, as if in that fragility, he'd found something stronger than himself. Zara didn't take her eyes off Grant and Miller. Though her body trembled, her voice hissed out, "You think your camera will bury the truth? There will be other cameras, and when that happens, it's you who'll be the criminals." The words stopped them for a beat. Grant quickly snapped, voice low and harsh, "You really think anyone's going to believe you? A greedy CEO and a little orphan girl going up against the whole system? That's your story?" Marcus heard every word, saw the brutal truth behind them. They didn't just want to beat him down. They wanted to erase his dignity, paint him as the villain for the world to see. That was the real trap, more vicious than any blow. And in that moment, Marcus knew he couldn't let this end as just another setup. He looked at Zara, saw fire burning in her tiny eyes, and he understood. This wasn't his battle alone anymore. It was theirs, together, against a long-running machine built on injustice. Grant stepped back half a pace and muttered to Miller, "Filming. We'll get exactly what we need." Miller nodded, eyes glinting with cruelty. Doyle stepped closer to Zara, grinning widely. "You've got guts, kid, but I swear that toughness is gonna cost you." Zara fired back without hesitation. "You're the ones who'll pay the price." The bystanders began to whisper. Some eyes shifted from mere curiosity to suspicion. They looked at Miller holding the camera, Grant raising his baton, and at Doyle gripping Zara's arm. No matter how much the officers tried to control the scene, it was slipping from their hands. Marcus saw it too. A flicker of hope sparked. He tightened his grip on Zara's hand and whispered, "We'll find a way." She gave a slight nod, eyes unblinking, like a young warrior caught in the middle of enemy lines. The camera light stayed on, capturing every move, every breath. But within the same dirty frame, Miller thought would destroy Marcus. Signs of the truth were beginning to show. And Marcus understood the game wasn't over. This was only the opening act of a battle where victory wouldn't belong to the strongest, but to the one who could keep the truth alive to the end. Doyle snapped his baton forward, and suddenly struck it down across Zara's back. The sound of the impact, dry and heavy, echoed through the street corner as the stick hit her small frame. Zara let out a choking gasp, her body curling inward, shoulders shaking, breath quick and shallow, but she fought not to collapse. Marcus's eyes widened, his blood boiling at the sight of a child being beaten in broad daylight, right in front of him, while the surrounding crowd stayed silent, no one daring to intervene. He could no longer hold on to the fragile calm he had clung to. His protective instinct surged to the surface. Marcus lunged forward. No thought, no strategy, just the need to shield her. But he was instantly met with a brutal punch from Grant. It was fast, strong, deliberate, snapping his head back, splitting his lip wide open, the taste of blood spreading across his mouth, one tooth rattling loose with a sharp, piercing ache. Marcus staggered, nearly falling to the sidewalk, but his legs fought to stay upright. In that moment, he was no longer a proud CEO walking confidently through glass-walled offices. He was a flesh and blood man, trembling under the weight of a coward's blow. Miller took in the scene, wasting no chance to humiliate. He threw his head back and laughed, the sound sharp and cruel, blending with the growing murmurs of the gathering crowd. He pointed the camera at Marcus, sweeping it around like he was filming a comedy, and shouted for all to hear, "Look at the millionaire CEO bleeding like a street rat." The words landed hard, ruthless, and degrading, reshaping Marcus's image in public, not as a man of power, but as a broken figure being torn down in the street. Blood dripped from Marcus's mouth onto his chin, red drops falling to the ground. He swallowed hard, feeling the pain spread from his jaw to his temple. But physical pain meant nothing compared to the fury igniting inside him. He raised his head, eyes burning red, gaze locked and furious. He wanted to fight back, to scream, to rip the baton from Doyle's hand, and strike back. But in that moment, Zara's piercing scream shattered the air. "Stop it! He's not the enemy!" The The words erupted from a child's throat, but their force and clarity went far beyond what Marcus could have imagined. Zara was no longer just a girl being struck, she had become a living witness, a voice accusing violence as it happened. Her cry echoed, making a few people in the crowd flinch, raising their phones higher, capturing not only the CEO being humiliated, but the courage of a child daring to defy those in power. Grant's face twisted, his eyes flashing with rage. He barked, "Shut up, kid. You don't know what you're saying." But Zara didn't lower her head. Though her body trembled and tears streamed down her cheeks, she shouted again, voice hoarse with pain but unshakable. "He's not the enemy. You're the ones destroying justice." Marcus heard those words, his heart pounding hard, pulsing through every vein. No one had ever stood up for him like that, let alone a girl soaked in blood and sweat. He suddenly realized that Zara was a mirror, reflecting every falsehood, every rotten layer of the power being abused in front of them. If he had once thought this was just a personal ordeal, he now knew Zara was fighting not just for herself, but for him. And for a deeper truth, the police were desperate to bury. Miller didn't let her speak further. He sneered and zoomed the camera in on Zara's face, streaked with tears and blood. He said loudly, "Look at this. A little black girl screaming to defend some rich old man. That's your society's joke right there." His words made some in the crowd shudder. They stopped laughing, stopped watching passively. Murmurs began to rise, and eyes filled with disgust turned toward the officers. Marcus tried to stand tall, despite the throbbing in his jaw. He swallowed the blood in his throat and stared straight into Miller's lens, speaking with a hoarse but steady voice. "You can film whatever you want, but the truth won't take your side." Doyle burst out laughing, arrogance dripping from his voice. "You think the world believes you? A CEO bleeding out in front of us looks just like an abuser caught in the act. Just wait." Marcus understood that every word he spoke, every move he made, was being twisted into pieces of the trap they had laid. But Zara's scream had cracked something open, a door to the eyes of the public, to footage they couldn't fully control. And he knew that if he could just hold on, if he didn't break, they still had a chance. Grant lowered the baton to Marcus's eye level, hatred flashing in his stare. "You think you're smarter than us, Hale? You'll find out soon what it's like to be cursed by the entire world." But Marcus didn't respond. He turned to Zara, their eyes locking for a moment. In her, he saw the fire of a child brave enough to fight power. In him, she saw more than a wealthy man, she saw a human being standing with her on the same side. On the sidewalk, more and more phones were raised. Screens glowed, recording the blood, the batons, the laughter, and Zara's scream. And in every frame, the story was no longer just about a CEO or a little girl. It was about truth and lies, justice and violence, about who would be left standing when the curtain finally fell. Marcus spat blood from his mouth, throat burning, but his voice rang clear. "Look closely, all of you. This isn't justice. This is a crime in a police uniform." The crowd murmured, a few scattered voices of protest breaking through, and Marcus knew the spark had been lit small, but ready to grow. Zara stood beside him, bruises on her back, blood on her knee, but eyes burning bright. She gripped his hand tightly, and in that moment, Marcus no longer felt alone. They had stepped into a battle where the enemy held all the power, but they carried the strongest weapon, the truth. And though they had been shamed, though blood had been spilled, they would not step back. Marcus stumbled, bracing himself against the blood and dust-streaked pavement, his body still trembling from the brutal punch he had just taken. He forced himself upright, breathing hard, his mind spinning like the whole world was tilting, but deep in his chest surged a fury he had never known. He looked straight into the eyes of the uniformed men in front of him, no longer clouded by confusion, but burning with contempt. His voice, hoarse from pain, rang out loud enough to startle the nearby crowd. "You're nothing but thugs in police uniforms." That wasn't just a protest, it was a verdict hurled straight into their faces. A CEO who had spent a lifetime speaking only with calculated words was now using the sharpest language he had. Grant froze for a moment, then his face turned crimson with rage. He pointed his baton directly at Marcus's face and roared, voice cold with threat, "Shut your mouth or I'll put you behind bars for life." The words hit like a gavel slamming down, a promise that the full weight of the system would crush him for even one more sentence. Zara flinched when she saw Marcus begin to step forward. She rushed to him and gripped his hand tightly, her eyes wet, but still fiercely bright. Her voice came out small, but sharper than anything else said so far. "You have to hold on, or they win." Her words were a tether, pulling Marcus back from the edge. Zara knew that one slip, one loss of control, would collapse everything. She was reminding him and herself that endurance was the last weapon they had left to protect the truth. Marcus looked down at her small hand, felt each trembling finger wrapped around his. He held it tighter, drawing strength from its fragility. In that instant, he realized that this wasn't his fight to protect her. Zara was the one keeping him from falling into the abyss. She was more delicate than anything around them, and yet tougher than all of it, like a small blade sharp enough to pierce the armor of those who thought themselves untouchable. Grant shouted again, trying to dominate. "Don't think I won't do it. One report, one statement, and the world will call you a pervert. Money won't save you, Hale." Miller panned the camera slowly, the red light blinking, recording every twitch, every drop of blood, still clinging to Marcus's lips. Doyle stood with his arms crossed, a smirk of disdain curling on his mouth, as if savoring the sight of prey struggling just before being finished off. In the thick tension strung like a wire between them, something unexpected happened. From across the street, a young man blended into the crowd, quietly pulled out his phone. He raised it high and started filming, frame by frame, capturing what stood before him. Zara trembling but unbroken, Marcus bloodied but still defiant, and 3 police officers basking in their cruelty. The camera shook with the filmer's breath, but that very unsteadiness gave the footage a raw, undeniable truth. Marcus hadn't yet noticed the presence of the man filming. He only sensed a shift in the air, a change in the crowd's eyes. Some whispered, some quietly pulled out their phones. The scene the officers had tried to control was beginning to fracture. They still believed the camera in Miller's hand was their only weapon, unaware that the scattered phones in the crowd were quietly turning into living evidence against them. Grant hadn't realized it either. He leaned in, lowered his baton to Marcus's shoulder, voice hissing through clenched teeth. "Get on your knees, Hale. Let the whole world see a CEO bow to us." He wanted to brand Marcus with a shame that couldn't be washed away, to make the image of a powerful man humiliated under police force stick in the public's mind. Marcus didn't move. He looked straight into Miller's lens, then turned to Zara. In her small eyes, he saw a silent message stand tall: "Don't kneel." His back straightened. Though his body ached and blood still trickled, he held the posture of someone who refused to surrender. He spoke, each word heavy as lead. "I will not kneel before this lie." The words echoed, stopping Grant and his crew for a beat. The crowd murmured, and a few soft voices of protest rose. The young man still filming felt his heart pound, knowing this footage would spread, carrying a weight no script from the officers could cover. Zara gripped Marcus's hand tighter and whispered, "You did the right thing." In that moment, Marcus understood that defiance and desperation wasn't always a punch or a shout. It was in standing tall, in keeping the truth from being buried. The officers began to sense the unrest growing in the crowd. Miller snapped, tightening his grip on the camera, trying to contain the moment. Doyle frowned, scanning the street, a flicker of worry in his eyes for the first time. Grant clenched his jaw, took a step back, and shouted to drown out the murmurs. "Everyone, stay back. This is a controlled scene." But the yelling only drew more attention. More phones rose, more eyes turned suspicious. Marcus remained standing, back straight, eyes blazing. He was no longer the man knocked down, no longer the CEO dragged through the mud, but a human being resisting in the face of corruption, using nothing but his own presence to push back against a rotten system. And beside him, Zara, her body small, blood and tears mixing, stood firm like a tiny torch burning fiercely. At that same moment, in the hands of the young man across the street, the video continued recording every frame, every word, every drop of blood. None of them knew that this moment would unleash a wave far beyond their sight, turning the officers' dirty game into evidence that would ultimately bring them down. That evening, as the sun slipped behind the skyline and night fell over the city, streetlights flickered on with a dull yellow glow, and the online world erupted. Within hours of the incident, the first video showing Marcus Hale being assaulted and Zara Collins screaming had been posted to Twitter. The young man who had filmed it with trembling hands hit the upload button, not realizing that just minutes later, the clip would spiral far beyond his control. The image of Marcus, face smeared with blood, beside a little girl with blood dripping from her knee as she screamed with a hoarse voice, spread at lightning speed. Every retweet was like a spark, each one linking to another, until it became a roaring blaze, burning through the darkness of lies. The internet exploded with debate, and a storm of comments flooded beneath the video that lasted less than 2 minutes. Thousands of voices echoed a single, incredulous question. A child screamed at a CEO to save him. Some were stunned, some skeptical, some outraged, others in tears. Harsh comments appeared. Cops beating a kid in broad daylight? Is this how little they value human life? Others added, I've never seen a CEO so humiliated and helpless. This is horrifying. Some wrote with sympathy, but many with rage, targeting the 3 officers in the video and demanding an immediate investigation. Within just a few hours, the hashtag number #ShutUpForJustice shot to the top of the national trending list. The phrase, pulled from Zara's exact words as she covered Marcus's mouth, became the slogan of an entire movement. Memes appeared of Marcus, bloodied, under the caption, "Shut up for justice." Others posted Zara's tearful, defiant face with the line, "Truth comes from the smallest voices." The shares climbed by the minute, and fiery commentary flooded every platform, from social media to forums, from local circles to global headlines. Online news outlets jumped in immediately. Sensational headlines followed. Millionaire CEO, beaten in public, saved by child's scream, and "Shut up for justice." When a child becomes a symbol, journalists dug into every frame, sought witnesses, and raced to identify the man in the video. Marcus Hale's name was repeated everywhere, now tied to images no one had ever imagined for a successful CEO. Split lips, loose teeth, eyes filled with rage. Zara, too, was now in the spotlight. People asked who she was, where she came from, and why she had been in the car with a financial titan. Meanwhile, in another room, the police were no longer idle. The video's rapid spread forced them to respond. Grant, Miller, and Doyle were no longer anonymous names. Their faces had been identified online and circulated everywhere. The department's media team quickly released a new video, edited straight from Miller's own camera. In the clip, Zara could be heard yelling, "Shut up," and Marcus was seen raising his hand in reaction, but the full context was cut out, leaving only the seconds that made him look like he was yelling at a child. Along with it came an official statement: Marcus Hale is under investigation for suspected child endangerment. The release of the edited video hit like a vicious counterattack. A portion of the public began to waver. New comments appeared under articles. What if this CEO really is hiding something? Or, if he's innocent, why didn't he say anything in the car? Rumors spread fast, and opportunists began smearing Marcus's name, dragging the story into a gray zone of suspicion. But at the same time, a fierce wave of resistance surged. Eyewitnesses started speaking out online. "I was there." The police attacked him. Other videos began to surface, short and shaky but enough to add new perspectives. Grant raising a baton, Doyle dragging Zara, Miller grinning. These fragmented clips came together to paint a clearer picture. Marcus, sitting alone in a holding room, learned about the social media firestorm from his lawyer's whispered update. His fists clenched, a mix of pain and disbelief washing over him. Part of him felt ashamed that his helplessness had been exposed so publicly, but another part flickered with hope. Because, despite the police releasing doctored clips and mainstream media hesitating, the truth had slipped beyond their control. Zara, with her small scream, had become a symbol, and that was beginning to fracture the system. On Twitter, people began creating satirical drawings, slogans, and video compilations. Some well-known artists joined the conversation, speaking out in support of Marcus and Zara. One singer wrote, "If justice is distorted, we'll scream until it's heard." A global journalist shared the original clip with the caption, "This isn't just a story about a CEO, it's a story about human rights." As the movement gained momentum online, the police doubled down in desperation. They released more spliced footage, fabricating a narrative that Marcus had approached a child. But the more they did, the more outrage exploded. With each new clip, the stitching and illogic became more obvious. People began comparing frames, pointing out differences between police footage and public videos. Tweets with side-by-side screenshots spread quickly. "Here's the truth they're hiding." Marcus couldn't directly participate in the online battle, but he could feel its heat. He knew his career, his reputation, and even his life were on the line. But for the first time, he didn't feel alone. Out there, millions were speaking for him, screaming for Zara. He understood now the fire had been lit, and it would not be easily extinguished. That night, the city didn't sleep. Phone screens lit up everywhere, from coffee shops to train stations, from dorm rooms to small houses in the suburbs. Everyone who watched the clip saw a piece of the truth, each person asking themselves the question that couldn't be ignored: who had really broken the law? The three powerful police officers, or the CEO with blood smeared across his face? The little girl screaming against injustice, or a child turned into a prop by the police? By the next morning, as the sun crept over the horizon, the hashtag number "Shut Up for Justice" was still holding the #1 spot. And with it, a much larger battle had officially begun. Just one night after social media had erupted with the hashtag number "Shut Up for Justice," mainstream news outlets jumped in all at once. By morning, major news broadcasts opened with bold headlines across their screens. CEO Marcus Hale in scandal involving black minor. Leading newspapers raced to publish sensational headlines. Radio programs repeatedly mentioned Marcus Hale's name, but instead of calling him a successful businessman, they attached it to the phrase, "suspected of child solicitation." Anchors spoke clearly and coldly, with a tone that left no room for doubt, as if the verdict had already been passed. The edited clip featuring the phrase, "shut up," became the focal point. In the police's version, Zara screamed in panic, while Marcus leaned in, appearing to lunge forward, his arm raised in a gesture that could be easily misinterpreted. The entire context was erased, leaving only the distorted moment. Viewers, watching just those few seconds, could easily believe a child was trying to defend herself from an older man. Television ran the clip repeatedly during prime time, hammering it into the public's mind that Marcus was the villain. As the media launched its attack, chaos erupted inside Marcus's company. The emergency boardroom was packed, department heads sitting around the table with tense expressions. Reports were slammed down, stocks plummeting, billions in market value wiped out in hours. Major partners called nonstop, many threatening to terminate contracts without a satisfactory explanation. Some advisors even suggested Marcus temporarily step down from leadership to protect the company's image. Each word hit like a blade straight to his chest. Marcus sat at the head of the table, his face bruised, lips still stained with blood from the previous day's assault. He said nothing, offered no response, his eyes drifting far beyond the room. Questions and accusations crashed around him like waves, but he didn't react. In his mind, Zara's scream echoed louder than anything else. "You don't even know yet." It struck him as a warning, a reminder that what he was facing was only the visible tip of something deeper, darker, still hidden beneath the surface. The image of Zara, her bleeding knee, her eyes glowing in the dark, haunted him. He knew he was not just facing a media crisis, but a calculated, organized takedown. Everything fit too perfectly. The police camera, the edited footage, the immediate flood of media coverage. Marcus understood clearly. Now something accidental couldn't have triggered a storm this massive. This was a plan, and he was the target. In the boardroom, a member of the executive committee spoke sharply. "We're losing billions because of you, Marcus. We can't let the entire company collapse for the honor of one man." The room stirred, some nodding in agreement, others lowering their gaze in silence. Marcus raised his head, his cold eyes sweeping across each face. He didn't need to say a word, and that silence made the room even more uneasy. Until now, one sentence from Marcus was enough to command the room, but now, he was seen as dead weight, a liability to be removed. In his mind, Marcus heard the scornful laughter of Grant, Miller, and Doyle. Those men had tried to turn him into a criminal, and now the media and public opinion were unknowingly playing along. His fists clenched, the heat of his blood pulsing just beneath the skin. He wasn't afraid of losing money, not even of losing the company. What terrified him was the idea of the truth being buried. If Zara had found the courage to scream, then he had no right to fall apart in this room. The chaos outside his company hadn't stopped. News channels brought in experts to analyze Marcus's psychological profile, offering baseless theories. Headlines blared, "From power CEO to suspected child predator, Marcus Hale's reputation collapses overnight." Crowds gathered outside the company headquarters, holding signs, shouting for him to resign. Photos of his bloodied face were printed and displayed as evidence of a crime, even though the truth had been twisted beyond recognition. Amid the noise, Marcus remembered Zara's eyes that never flinched. He heard her voice again, "Don't let them win." That line was the thread holding him upright. He took a deep breath, straightened his back, letting the flood of criticism in the room crash over him. He knew if he lost control now, everything would truly collapse. But if he held his ground, there was still a chance to turn it around. Outside, social media kept burning. While mainstream outlets pushed the edited footage, the online community hunted for the truth. People compared frames, analyzed details, exposing rough cuts and inconsistencies. Short clips from bystanders began to surface, showing Grant raising a baton, Doyle dragging Zara, and Marcus bleeding. These raw images slowly tore apart the false narrative the police had constructed. In the suffocating room, Marcus's throat was dry, but his mind had never been clearer. He understood this was no longer just about him. This was a battle between truth and lies, between a child who screamed for justice and those who used power to hide their crimes. He didn't know how far he would go, but he knew Zara had given him something unshakable, a reason not to fall, and her words still echoed in his mind like a relentless chorus. "You don't even know yet." The next morning, the news flooded every corner of the city, from skyscraper lobbies to corner coffee shops. Major outlets raced to publish updates, and images of Marcus Hale being escorted into the police station appeared on front pages with malicious headlines. Reporters swarmed, microphones shoved in his face, questions hurled one after another. "Do you admit to luring the girl? Why did she tell you to shut up in the car? Are you hiding something?" Marcus walked through the suffocating crowd, camera flashes bursting like strobe lights, each frame slicing into his dignity like a blade. The interrogation room was cold, the harsh neon light casting his shadow sharply on the wall. In front of him lay a stack of papers the police claimed were indisputable evidence. The lead investigator flipped through the file, his voice calm and cruel. "You're suspected of abducting a poor child." Marcus gripped the chair, his back stiffening. He stared at printed stills from the edited footage, Zara being dragged out, and himself in a distorted frame that made it look like he was pulling her. Everything was arranged to cast him as the villain, and the people across from him treated it as an unquestionable truth. The pre-written narrative was read out smoothly. Marcus Hale lured a homeless girl into his car, was caught by bystanders, and police had to intervene. In each line, Marcus heard a meticulously crafted plan to disgrace him, to turn a man recently beaten into a criminal. He tried to respond, "I didn't kidnap anyone. I didn't lure her. She appeared suddenly. Even I don't understand how." But every word was recorded as a weak justification, and the cold eyes across the table remained unchanged, as if they had been instructed to dismiss anything he said. In that moment, Marcus felt himself pushed into an abyss, not by physical pain from fists and batons, but by absolute isolation. He realized his honor wasn't just damaged, it was being crushed. Every word in the media, every news headline, hammered another nail into the coffin labeled reputation. He sat there, blood dried on his lips, listening to the scratch of pens and the rustle of papers, his mind filled only with the image of Zara screaming in the street, of blood trickling from her small knee. She had shouted the truth, but now that truth was so distorted, no one believed it. Outside, public opinion remained divided. Half demanded that Marcus be punished, while the other half began to question the police's version. Heated debates broke out across forums. Some argued, no CEO would be stupid enough to abduct a girl in broad daylight, while others retorted, he's rich, he thinks he can get away with anything. In those lines, Marcus saw himself split in two, the real man trying to protect the truth, and the dark shadow others had cast over him. The interrogation dragged on for hours, with Marcus asked the same questions over and over, each answer logged as incriminating evidence. When he finally left the room, the daylight outside no longer felt like comfort. He knew his honor was in ruins, and to reclaim it, he would have to walk a path paved with blood and tears, where truth had to fight against an entire system determined to bury him. News of Zara's disappearance exploded like a bomb in an already stifling atmosphere. The girl who had been the heart of the first viral video, who screamed to protect Marcus in front of the crowd, had suddenly vanished. The media pounced, each outlet spinning its own narrative. Some claimed she was taken into protective custody. Others suspected the police had hidden her on purpose. Social media blazed, words flying at lightning speed, filled with support, outrage, and fear. One side believed Marcus was truly guilty, that Zara had disappeared out of fear and a need to escape him. The other side insisted it was a silencing scheme, that those in power had stepped in to erase the only living proof. The debate split public opinion into two warring camps, each desperate to defend its belief, and, in the divide, truth became harder to see. Marcus learned the news while still under heavy surveillance. Sitting in a cramped room, he heard his lawyer say, "The girl can't be found. They're saying Zara disappeared from the temporary shelter." He stayed silent for a long time, each breath building like it might shatter his chest. Zara, the child who once told him, "You have to endure, or they win," had now been pulled from the light. He saw her eyes again, bright as blades, now more fragile than ever. He knew her disappearance wasn't random. Zara was the only piece that could flip the entire game. As he wrestled with his thoughts, an unexpected twist surfaced. A young journalist from an independent outlet received an anonymous email, the sender's address encrypted and untraceable. The message was short but powerful enough to flip the table. "There's an original copy of the video." Attached was a link to a large, unreleased file. The reporter opened it, and on screen appeared uncut, unedited footage. Marcus is being beaten. Zara dragged, Grant laughing. Everything raw, brutal, and undeniable. No more blurred context, no more manipulative framing to paint Marcus as the villain. The leak spread quickly through the press. Though no outlet dared to publish it just yet, the reporter faced a critical choice: release it immediately to save a man's life, or verify it further to avoid being labeled fake news. As he hesitated, whispers began to stir, rumors of an uncut video somewhere out there. That truth had not been fully buried. The online world, sensing fresh blood, began to search, to share, to speculate, turning original video into the internet's hottest keyword. Marcus heard the news again through his lawyer, and for the first time in days of being crushed, he felt a sliver of light creeping in. If the original footage existed, it meant Zara hadn't lied. It meant her scream had been validated. But at the same time, a chill ran down his spine. Who had sent that email? And were they safe now? In this power game, anyone who dared expose the truth became a target. Marcus clenched his fists, Zara's voice echoing in his mind, "You don't know everything yet." And he understood that things were even more brutal than what he was facing. The public debate outside didn't calm down. One side claimed Marcus was just grasping at straws with fake news, that no original video existed. The other saw the anonymous email as a beacon of hope, chanting the slogan, "Justice for Zara, justice for Marcus." Articles and tweets multiplied, all mentioning the phrase, "original video," and the rising tide swept away every other headline. Society held its breath, waiting for the moment the curtain would be pulled back to reveal the raw truth hidden behind a filthy script. Marcus sat in the silent room, each moment stretching out like a century. His honor had been destroyed, Zara had vanished, but the truth still had a chance to break free. He knew that once that original footage came to light, not only would his fate change, but an entire system once thought unshakable would have to face collapse. The cell was cramped, the dim light casting Marcus's shadow across the cold concrete floor. He sat leaning against the wall, dried blood still crusted at the corner of his mouth, his mind heavy with the echoes of the chaos from the day before. In the still darkness, Zara's image burned vividly, her eyes fierce in the crowd, her hoarse scream slicing through the air like a blade. Enough, he's not the enemy. Marcus closed his eyes, that image cutting deep into his thoughts, like a small flame burning through the darkness. He wondered where she was now, whether she was still safe or already pulled away from the reach of false justice. Each tick of the clock rang loud in the silence, stretching every second into an eternity. But beyond the cold walls, the world kept moving, and the rumors grew louder. News outlets, social media, and television stations all hammered the same cruel, mind-numbing phrase into the public's ears: pedophile CEO, despicable. That line carved itself into Marcus's honor like a blade, spreading faster than any defense. He heard the guards whispering in the hallway, their broken sentences sharp enough to pierce through. Rich and sick, nowhere to hide. Marcus curled his hand, nails digging into flesh. He wanted to scream that it was all wrong, that the lies being fed to the world weren't the truth, but he knew his voice couldn't reach past the bars. The whole system was moving to drown him, to turn him into a warning for anyone who dared resist. He clenched his jaw, recalling Grant's contemptuous stare, Miller's vicious laughter, and Doyle's cold smile. Their faces haunted the shadows of the cell, taunting him like ghosts that couldn't be shaken. Outside, public opinion remained divided. Half believed the accusations, fueling the fire with cruel words. The other half questioned how a CEO could be foolish enough to act in broad daylight, and wondered why the edited clip was released so fast. But Marcus understood this fight wasn't about reason, it was a war of emotion. Once someone believed he was guilty, changing that belief would not come easily. Honor was crushed, far more swiftly than it could ever be restored. In the darkness, he breathed deep, struggling to contain his rage. He thought of Zara, of her voice cutting through as his blood spilled onto the pavement. That child had stood up for him, dared to defy those in power. If Zara could scream in desperation, then he couldn't let this darkness swallow everything. He knew the original footage was out there, waiting to surface, and once the truth came to light, the dirty game would fall apart. In the quiet, Marcus reminded himself that even the darkest night has an end, and he had to survive to see the light return. While Marcus still sat in the silent jail cell, the iron door creaked, not for a guard to enter, but for an unfamiliar face to appear. It was a young reporter, eyes bright and slightly anxious, clutching a small case. The man didn't speak immediately, only glanced around, waiting for a quiet moment, then gently pulled out a chair across from Marcus. His voice was low but firm. "I have something you need to see." From the case, he took out a small USB drive and placed it on the metal table. Marcus frowned briefly, not yet understanding, until the reporter plugged it into the laptop he'd brought. The screen lit up with familiar frames. The video played, but this time there were no strange cuts, no angles showing him as a man with sinister intentions. Everything appeared intact. Grant raising a baton threateningly, Doyle dragging Zara to the ground, Miller grinning while Marcus was beaten bloody. Amid the chaos, Zara's voice rang out, hoarse but powerful. "He's not the enemy." Marcus held his breath, each detail raw and unfiltered, and in that moment, he realized the truth had been preserved. The young reporter looked at Marcus, his face tense. "I can't release this right away. If I do it wrong, they'll bury the footage and bury me with it. But at least now you know, justice still lives inside these frames." Marcus stayed silent for a long while, his hands clenched so tightly the dried blood cracked at the joints. He looked up, his eyes no longer weary with rage, but burning with renewed fire. He knew everything that had happened was only the beginning, and this truth was the match he needed to strike back. "This fight is just beginning," Marcus said, his voice low and solid as steel. It wasn't a promise to the reporter, but a vow to himself that he would not let men in uniform hide their crimes for one more day. In that cold jail cell, the loneliness seemed to vanish, replaced by a quiet surge of strength. He looked straight at the screen, frozen on Zara mid-scream, her small eyes blazing, and he knew they had both been pulled into a battle with no way back. The reporter carefully pulled out the USB, his gaze steady, though tinged with worry. He stood, gave a subtle nod, and walked out, leaving Marcus in the cell. But this time, the darkness no longer consumed him. He sat upright, fists still clenched, and in his heart, only one truth echoed. The truth will be revealed, even if everything must be sacrificed to make it so. In the days when every door seemed slammed shut in Marcus's face, while the public still buzzed with accusations, a faint sliver of light unexpectedly cracked open. His trusted lawyer, who had been meticulously combing through files and scattered evidence, finally uncovered a video clip from a street camera located several dozen meters from the scene. It was one of those public surveillance cameras often forgotten, but luckily had been working and had recorded footage on the exact day of the incident. When the footage played, Marcus froze. On the grainy screen, he saw himself being dragged out of the car, saw Grant and Miller forcing him down with batons, saw tiny Zara collapse when Doyle grabbed her arm. The footage lacked the clarity of handheld cameras, but it was clear enough to show who attacked and who was the victim. The lawyer placed the laptop in front of Marcus in the jail cell, his voice calm but his eyes glinting with hope. This is something they never thought would survive. Marcus stared at the screen, his hand tightening, emotion rising. He didn't just see himself being assaulted, he saw the truth, once buried, finally clawing its way out. Each frame was a jagged shard, piecing together a damning portrait of violence committed by men in uniform. It didn't stop there. The lawyer had received another piece of evidence, this time from an anonymous source. A short audio recording, clearly capturing Grant's gravelly voice issuing an order: "Force the kid to kneel, make sure it's on camera, make it look like the CEO's attacking her." That sentence echoed through the speaker like a gavel hitting the bench, undeniable. Marcus listened to each word, fury boiling in his veins. Grant's cruelty was no longer speculation or second-hand account, it was a living, breathing sound, proof of everything Marcus and Zara had endured. The lawyer looked at him, voice steady. "We've got the first piece. It's not enough to bring them all down yet, but it's enough to open the door for truth to walk through." Marcus didn't speak, he simply nodded, his eyes lit with the rare spark of hope after so many days in darkness. He knew this wasn't victory, it was only the beginning of a long, grueling battle, but inside him, that sliver of light was enough to hold him upright, to keep him from falling. Outside, the public remained divided, but rumors about new evidence had begun to spread. A few independent journalists mentioned, "Sources close to the case confirm a street camera recorded the entire incident." These lines spread quickly online, emboldening those who supported Marcus, while making the opposing side visibly uneasy. Those who once firmly believed in his guilt now had to tread more carefully, because no one knew when the footage and audio would go public. Marcus sat in his cell, eyes fixed on the wall as if trying to see through it. He recalled the punches, the batons, the hoarse scream from Zara, and matched it all with the video and audio. He knew now proof of the truth existed, and he vowed that when this sliver of light widened, it would become the blade that slices through the lies Grant and his men had so carefully constructed. That night, Marcus didn't sleep. He sat in silence, letting the recording echo hauntingly in his mind. Grant's voice, crude and shameless, had now become the driving force pushing him forward. "Force the kid to kneel. Make sure it's on camera." That sentence wasn't just evidence of a crime. It was the death knell for those who once believed themselves untouchable. Marcus pressed his lips together, eyes steely, and whispered, "The light has broken through, and I will see this to the end." First sliver of light didn't just rescue Marcus's hope, it sparked the storm that was about to come, one where justice and truth would no longer be buried in darkness. The footage from the street camera and the audio file became treasures in the hands of Marcus's legal team, but they knew the time to release them had not yet come. Everything was locked away in a secure vault, accessible to only a select few. Marcus's lawyer emphasized that revealing it too soon would give the police time to bury or twist it, but holding it until the right moment would turn it into a fatal strike. Marcus listened and nodded silently, no longer tired but instead lit by a determined fire. He had come too far to turn back, and now he understood that every moment of silence was preparation for the day justice would roar. Inside the cell, Marcus spent long hours sitting still, replaying every scene in his mind. He imagined the moment in court when the video and audio would be played, the room falling silent as the truth unfolded. He knew public opinion was still divided, knew his company's stock continued to plummet, knew his personal honor had been dragged so far down, it seemed irreparable. But he believed that one moment of unveiling the truth could change everything. This was no longer a private matter, but the unraveling of a system that believed it could survive on lies. As night fell, moonlight filtered through the bars, the thin shaft of light deepening his sense of anticipation. Each step of the guards in the hallway echoed like a ticking clock, counting down to the moment of reckoning. Marcus leaned his head back against the wall, closed his eyes, and whispered as if to himself, "They will kneel." The words were quiet, but carried weight, like an oath that could not be taken back. Every time his lawyer visited, he reminded Marcus to be patient, because victory didn't come from shouting, it came from striking at the right time. Marcus understood that now. He no longer reacted in anger, as he had in the beginning, but learned to stay quiet, to watch, to prepare. He spent his time memorizing every detail of the original clip, every word of the audio recording, as if learning a battle anthem that would one day be heard by the public. And within him, each second of waiting built another layer of resolve, another layer of fury compressed, ready to explode with unstoppable force. Outside, the articles kept attacking, but some independent outlets had begun hinting at irregularities. They mentioned missing camera angles, the possibility of other evidence yet to be revealed. No one dared confirm anything, but Marcus knew these signs meant public opinion was shifting. He pictured the day, not far off, when the entire charade would collapse, and Grant, Miller, and Doyle would be forced to lower their heads before society, kneel before the justice they once mocked. In the darkness of his cell, Marcus felt his heart no longer beat solely for his own survival. He thought of Zara, of those small but blazing eyes that had kept him standing in his darkest moment. He made a silent promise. The day the evidence was released would also be the day Zara's honor was restored. No one had the right to erase her scream. No one had the right to turn it into a joke. And to make that happen, he would have to wait, endure, and keep the fire burning until the final moment. The evidence lay untouched in the vault, like a bomb waiting to detonate. Marcus knew that once it came to light, there would be no more room for ambiguity. No one would be left who could deny the truth. Each time he envisioned that moment, his lips pressed tighter, and the same old whisper repeated itself, heavy as a hammer against his chest. They will kneel. He no longer thought about saving himself alone. He thought about saving the voice of a child who had spoken out when no one else dared. He thought about the countless others crushed under the same system. Every insult hurled at him in the media, every lie dressed as fact, only sharpened his focus. He had learned that silence could be a weapon when wielded with precision. So he waited, not in weakness, but in calculated stillness. Outside, the world debated, speculated, twisted fact. But inside that cell, Marcus Hale was no longer the broken man they had tried to bury. He was the flame they failed to extinguish. And that flame, now burning steady and silent, was ready to set the truth ablaze. While public opinion had yet to settle, an internationally recognized human rights organization officially released a statement demanding a full investigation into the entire police unit to which Grant, Miller, and Doyle belonged. They pointed to a series of irregularities in how Marcus's case was handled, emphasizing that the edited clips could not be considered reliable evidence. This statement appeared across major media platforms, serving as a wake-up call for a society already caught in a whirlwind of misinformation. It asserted that without an independent inquiry, justice would remain buried beneath the cloak of power. As soon as the statement went public, Marcus's lawyer's phone began buzzing non-stop. Journalists, civil society groups, and even opposition politicians expressed their concern. Voices that had once been scattered now formed a chorus, demanding accountability not just for the three officers, but for the entire system that enabled their violence. Small protests began forming, with signs reading, "Investigate now," and "Justice is not for sale." Step by step, the isolation Marcus had endured began to fade, replaced by a growing solidarity from strangers. In that climate, something even more unexpected happened. Former victims, once silent out of fear, began coming forward to share their stories. A middle-aged man appeared on local television, his eyes sunken but burning with conviction. He recounted how Grant's team had detained him without cause, used force, and coerced him into signing a false statement. He had stayed quiet then due to a lack of proof and fear of retaliation, but after witnessing what happened to Marcus and Zara, he could no longer stay silent. His story poured more fuel on the growing fire of public outrage. Soon after, a young woman posted a self-recorded video, her voice trembling as she recalled being unlawfully searched and yelled at by Miller. She described in detail the rough handling, the racial slurs, the humiliation. Thousands shared her video, expressing both anger and support. She ended with a simple yet powerful statement, "I've been afraid for years, but today I speak so that kids like Zara won't have to go through the same thing." Her words transformed her into a symbol of courage. More accusations followed, each person offering another piece of the puzzle, together forming a grim portrait of how that police unit had operated for years. People began connecting the dots between past incidents, noting strange similarities in official reports. All bore traces of abuse, fabricated evidence, and disdain for the vulnerable. Every story told was not just an accusation, but proof that the truth was finding its way back. Marcus listened as his lawyer recounted the recent developments during their next visit. Though still confined within four walls, he felt as if the air had become lighter. He was no longer the only one fighting in the dark out there. Others had begun to speak up. He closed his eyes, recalling Zara's words, "You have to endure, or they win." Now, he felt those other voices had joined hers, forming a harmony stronger than anything before, shaking the confidence of those who once hid behind their power. The wave of former victims stepping forward forced mainstream media to shift. Major news outlets moved from attacking Marcus to questioning the integrity of the police force. Talk shows brought in analysts to consider the possibility that Marcus had been set up. The debates grew louder, but this time, they weren't one-sided. The demand for justice gained momentum, growing strong enough that the city government had no choice but to promise an independent investigation. In the darkness of his cell, Marcus clenched his fists, feeling for the first time that the fury in his chest was shared. The voices rising weren't replacing his, but standing beside it to prove that the truth couldn't be twisted forever. And he knew the more people dared to speak, the more pieces would fall into place, and the day the wall of lies collapsed would come sooner. Amid the fierce public division, a new wave of shock hit. Zara Collins was found. She had appeared at a small church in the suburbs, with moss-covered walls and faded roof tiles. An elderly caretaker had discovered her curled up in a corner of the prayer room, clothes disheveled and eyes filled with fear. The news spread quickly, shaking the entire city. No one expected the key witness to be hiding in such a quiet place, far from the chaos of media lights. When reporters rushed to the church, the priest firmly blocked their access, allowing only Marcus's lawyer and a few trusted individuals inside. Zara sat on a wooden bench, arms wrapped tightly around her bandaged knees. She looked up, eyes red and puffy, gaze tired and wary. Gone was the fierce strength from her public scream. Now she looked like a child pushed to the edge, clinging to a temporary shelter just to breathe. The lawyer asked gently why she had disappeared. Zara bit her lip, and after a pause, the words came out, "They swore to kill me if I told." The sentence landed heavily in the silent room. Her voice was small, choked, but unmistakably clear. She explained that after the first video went viral, a group of strangers began following her, whispering threats. Some leaned in to hiss at her while she was under protective custody. Others knocked on her door at night, leaving only a blank slip of paper with a few words, "Stay silent if you want to live." The story sent chills through everyone. It explained Zara's sudden disappearance, the long silence that had fueled public doubt. She hadn't run because she feared Marcus, but because she herself had become the hunted. Every word she spoke, every detail she revealed, shed more light on the brutality of the force behind Grant and his accomplices. The lawyer sat in silence, writing down every sentence, knowing full well the weight of this testimony. Zara continued, her voice weak but steady, saying she had come to the church because she believed it was the only place peaceful enough to escape surveillance. The priest and the staff there had given her food, water, and a small bed. But fear still clung to her, making her flinch at every footstep, heart racing each time car lights flashed past the window. She admitted that every night she dreamed of being dragged into the street, of Miller's cruel laughter, the crack of a baton across her back, and Grant's face hissing threats. News of Zara's discovery instantly exploded across media outlets. One side rejoiced, calling her return a breakthrough, the start of the truth coming out. The other side expressed doubt, claiming the testimony of a trembling child held no weight. But the line, "They swore to kill me if I told," became a quote seen everywhere. On social media, thousands shared images of the old church where Zara had taken shelter, alongside calls to protect her. The hashtag #ProtectZara rose up, joined by "Shut Up for Justice," turning Zara from a witness into a symbol of both fragility and courage in the face of oppression. Marcus learned of it when his lawyer returned. He sat still, hands clenched together, eyes closed as if to hold Zara's image in his mind. He heard the girl's words again, "They swore to kill me if I told," and felt a surge of rage mixed with compassion. He knew the burden she carried was too much for a child, and because of that, he had no right to collapse. He pictured the day she would walk into court, head held high, speaking the truth, and he would be there beside her to witness justice be named. Zara's return didn't just restore shaken belief, it changed the entire game. From independent voices and past victims, now the most critical living witness had come back, carrying both fear and truth. And in that fear, society began to see that anyone who threatens a child to hide a crime can never claim to stand for justice. The day Zara was brought in for official questioning, the area outside was packed with reporters and onlookers. Everyone wanted to hear it from her, the girl who had become the center of the case and the only hope to clear Marcus's name. When the heavy wooden doors closed, leaving only Zara, the lawyer, and a few investigators in the room, the silence was thick with anticipation. Zara sat on a metal chair, her small hands tightly clasped together, her shoulders trembling, but her eyes steady. She took a deep breath and said, her voice catching, "I told him to shut up to save us both." That sentence was not just the truth, but a tear-soaked confession, admitting that her actions that day came from fear of being killed, not because Mr. Marcus was a bad man. The room stayed silent for a few seconds, only the investigator's pen scratching down every word. The lawyer beside her nodded gently, trying to reassure her. Zara continued, her voice quieter, but clear. She had seen the furious eyes of Grant and Miller through the window, had clearly heard them threaten to break Marcus, if he dared speak. The only thing she could do was cover his mouth and shout, "Shut up," because she truly believed that if he fought back, neither of them would survive. Tears dropped onto the table, but her voice did not waver. Zara spoke as if lifting a burden that had weighed her down far too long. Marcus was brought into a private room to listen to her testimony. When he heard the words, "I told him to shut up to save us both," he bowed his head, hands covering his face, throat tight. In his lifetime, he had received countless compliments, had been hailed as a symbol of success, but never had any words moved him like those of this small girl. When he was allowed to see Zara after the testimony, he looked at her, eyes filled with tears but shining brightly, and said, voice trembling with emotion, "You've been braver than anyone." Zara looked up, lips pressing together, perhaps not expecting that kind of recognition, but there was a flicker of relief in her eyes. Marcus's words were not just comfort, they were acknowledgement that she, fragile in body, had done something even the powerful could not do: stand up and shout the truth in a moment of life and death. The transcript of her testimony was immediately archived, and as soon as a few lines leaked, public opinion erupted. Headlines shifted tone. Zara admits she shouted to protect Marcus. Young witness reveals horrifying truth. Online, people shared Zara's quote as a new symbol, a clear sign that Marcus had not committed the crime he was accused of. Marcus's words, "You've been braver than anyone," also spread, painting the image of two people, one old, one young, standing side by side, together resisting the darkness of power. Inside the cell, Marcus felt a weight lift from his chest. Even though the road ahead was still long, he knew Zara had stepped out of the shadows of fear, and that alone helped him regain his calm. As he recalled the moment he spoke to her, he understood that from now on, they were bound as unshakable allies, both holding the light that would expose the truth. The fight wasn't over, but this confession marked a turning point, one that made it harder for the liars to twist the story any further. Outside, people kept chanting slogans, human rights organizations kept speaking out, and now, they had one more solid reason to demand justice. In that small interrogation room, a young girl's trembling voice echoed far beyond the walls, like a bell tolling to signal that truth was clawing its way back into view. Marcus closed his eyes, letting her words repeat in his mind, as both a reminder and a vow. He would not let Zara's strength go to waste. Just as public opinion was still reeling from Zara's testimony, another unexpected development turned the situation upside down. A young police officer, who had been present at the scene that day but had always remained in the background, came forward to confess to an independent news outlet. He sat in a small room, face gaunt, hands shaking on the wooden table, voice strained but firm. "I was forced to take part in the setup." That confession landed like a direct blow to the wall of lies built by Grant and his allies. He explained that he had only recently started the job, thinking his role was to uphold order, but that day, superiors ordered him to help stage the scene, block citizen recordings, and stay silent in front of any questions. He admitted he had tried to resist, but pressure from senior officers and threats to his career forced him to comply. When the interview was released, his every word echoed across live-stream broadcasts, and the city froze. It wasn't just Marcus or Zara speaking anymore this time. Someone inside the police force confirmed there had been a staged operation. The quote, "I was forced to take part in the setup," instantly became headline material, appearing on front pages and spreading like wildfire online. Outrage erupted, with chants demanding accountability rising in public squares. No one could brush the matter off as a rumor or an excuse anymore, because this confession came from someone with power inside the system. In coffee shops, on buses, in school hallways, people couldn't stop talking. Several major outlets that had previously portrayed Marcus negatively were now forced to shift tone, publishing the full confession and questioning the level of cover-up inside the police force. Legal experts appeared on TV, analyzing how this could be the key to launching a full-scale investigation, even pressing charges against the officers directly involved. The atmosphere across the city burned with intensity, not just anger anymore, but mounting political pressure. Marcus heard the news from his lawyer, his heart heavy, yet ignited by a spark of hope. He knew every word from that young officer was a crack in the once impenetrable wall built by Grant and his accomplices. He pictured the moment the entire system would be forced to answer in court, and he pictured Zara, her eyes lighting up when the truth was finally proven. In his cell, he whispered to himself that patience had been rewarded, that justice was slowly making its way back. The entire city was shaken, no one could remain indifferent. Citizens organized larger marches, holding signs demanding the dismissal and prosecution of the entire police unit involved. International human rights organizations sent additional letters calling for an investigation, and the central government was forced to intervene. Emergency meetings were held, and pressure mounted on the leadership of the police department. One man's confession had shattered the curtain they had so carefully constructed, and in that upheaval, for the first time after a long stretch of relentless pressure, Marcus and Zara were no longer alone, because an entire city had awakened to the truth. On the day of the official trial, the city courthouse was packed from early morning. People came not just to follow a case, but to witness whether justice still existed. The gallery was filled to capacity, from major domestic journalists, international reporters, to everyday citizens who had once shared their outrage online. The air was thick with tension. Every whisper felt heavy. At the defendant's table, Marcus sat upright, his face still bruised, his gaze calm. Beside him, his lawyer arranged a thick stack of files, occasionally flipping through pages, preparing for the counterattack. When the judge struck the gavel to open the session, the room shook with the dry echo. The prosecutor began with familiar accusations, still relying on the edited footage and pre-written reports. They portrayed Marcus as a corrupted, wealthy man, abusing power to approach children, then fabricating a story to deceive the public. Some in the audience frowned, others shook their heads, but the mood remained divided. Marcus's lawyer listened quietly, his eyes calm, as if waiting for the moment to strike back. When his turn came, the lawyer stood and spoke with a voice that rang out clearly. He didn't immediately deny the charges, but began by recalling Zara's scream, the words that had echoed across social media, "He's not the enemy." Then he slowly pulled out a USB and plugged it into the courtroom projector. The large screen lit up, and for the first time, the entire courtroom witnessed the original, unedited video. The footage showed Marcus being dragged, Grant swinging a baton, Doyle grabbing Zara, and Miller grinning with delight. Zara's scream echoed through the speakers, blending with the brutal sound of the baton. The courtroom fell silent. Many in the audience gaped, and some held their heads in disbelief. On the press bench, reporters snapped photos in unison, taking notes, phones lighting up as they rushed to break the news. The prosecutor went pale, trying to rise and object, but the judge signaled for silence to allow the video to play through. Each frame landed like a blade cutting through the lies that had endured until now. When the screen finally went dark, the room remained hushed, then erupted into murmurs of outrage, this time aimed squarely at the police team. The lawyer didn't stop there. He presented the audio recording of Grant ordering the abuse of Zara. When that raspy voice filled the courtroom, "Force the girl to kneel. Get it on camera." Everyone held their breath. There was no room for denial, because that voice alone exposed the true nature of those who once stood on the side of justice. The courtroom ignited not with real fire, but with the fury and heat of public reckoning. Marcus sat still, eyes fixed on the faces in the courtroom. He saw nods, serious expressions, and even tears of anger. He knew the battle wasn't over, but this moment marked a turning point. The fire of justice was igniting in the hearts of the people, and from now on, Grant and his accomplices would have no place to hide. As the judge struck the gavel again to restore order, the room still buzzed. A voice rose from the back rows, unclear who it belonged to. "The truth has finally been seen." The words spread, repeated from mouth to mouth, building into a growing echo. The trial had become a blaze, burning away the lies that once surrounded them, and Marcus knew the path to reclaiming his honor had begun to open. After Marcus's lawyer played the full original video, the judge called the young witness to the stand. Zara stepped up to the wooden podium, her thin legs trembling, but her eyes clear and bright. The entire courtroom held its breath, every gaze following her every step. The lawyer gently placed a hand on Zara's shoulder to reassure her, then stepped aside. When asked to speak, Zara took a deep breath, her small hands gripping the podium edge, and her voice came out hoarse but firm. "They wanted to turn him into a monster." That sentence pierced through the wall of deception, and the courtroom erupted in whispers. Zara recounted in detail how the police dragged her from the car, how they kept yelling, pointing cameras, and hurling insults. She emphasized that their goal wasn't to protect anyone, it was to make Marcus look like a villain in the public eye. Her voice trembled at times, recalling the threats, but each word she spoke poured fuel on the fire of anger, spreading through the courtroom. Marcus sat below, his heart tightening as he listened to Zara relive those haunting memories. He remembered her eyes when she screamed, "Shut up," in the car, and now, it was the same gaze, standing firm before an entire system to speak the truth. He wanted to rise and shield her, but he knew this was the moment Zara had to speak for herself. Her words held more power than any defense, because they came from a purity no one could deny. The courtroom murmurs swelled, then turned into louder whispers. Some people cried, others nodded, and a few even stood to applaud. The judge struck the gavel, calling for order, but the outrage had outgrown the limits of a typical trial. Reporters typed furiously, phones streamed live as every word Zara spoke was captured. The moment the first short clip hit the internet, the hashtag number Justice for Zara appeared, and within an hour shot to the top of the trending list. On Twitter, comments poured in. "A child dares to speak the truth in court, and we stay silent?" They tried to make Mr. Lee too loss, they too pardon, DN, Marcus a monster, but they're the real monsters. Zara's quote was shared thousands of times, printed on images, edited into videos, and became a new rallying cry in the fight for justice. Those who once doubted now turned in support, and many public figures voiced admiration for the girl's courage. The atmosphere in the courtroom remained taut like a stretched wire, but the situation had never been clearer. Zara was no longer just a witness, she had become a symbol. The hashtag number Justice for Zara dominated every platform, creating an undeniable wave of pressure. Marcus looked around and saw the eyes of those who once doubted him, now filled with something different, shimmering with belief and rightful outrage. He knew that with her testimony, not only was his honor slowly being restored, but the truth itself was being pulled out from the shadows. Zara stood there, small but radiant, leaving an indelible mark on the hearts of everyone who witnessed her. Her words hadn't just shattered the curtain of lies, they had opened a new path for justice, where the voice of a child could compel an entire society to listen. On the day of the verdict, the courtroom was packed so tightly that many people had to stand shoulder to shoulder in the hallway just to hear the outcome. The bright white lights glared, and the air was so heavy it felt like each breath carried weight. The judge read from an indictment dozens of pages long, his voice deep and steady, each word falling like a hammer blow against the wall of lies that had hung over the city for so long. As he listed the charges: assault, fabricated evidence, abuse of power, every eye turned to Grant, Miller, and Doyle. The three men who once stood so arrogantly in public now lowered their heads, faces pale and drained, all arrogance gone. The prison sentences were announced, each name tied to years that felt like chains, drawing murmurs of outrage and grim satisfaction from the room. Grant, who had struck Marcus and ordered the assault on Zara, received the harshest sentence, linked to multiple accusations uncovered by other witnesses. Miller, responsible for editing and spreading the deceptive footage, was also sentenced heavily, along with a ban from ever holding a public position again. Doyle, who had dragged Zara to the ground and laughed while she was in pain, received a punishment no less severe. The final bang of the judge's gavel marked the end of their grip on the truth. Marcus sat in the gallery, eyes slowly closing, as if to absorb every moment. He heard each word: sentence, imprisonment, abuse of power, and felt a release deep in his chest. The dark days, the fists, the humiliation, and the public doubt were now wiped away by the law's recognition. When the judge moved on to declare Marcus fully acquitted, the courtroom erupted in applause. He was declared innocent, his trampled dignity restored. In that moment, Marcus raised his head not in triumph, but to receive the light of justice after so many days in the dark. Zara sat in the witness row, her eyes shining but calm. She gave a small smile when Marcus's name was cleared, as if confirming that her scream that day had not been in vain. Marcus's lawyer bowed his head too, his expression a blend of solemnity and relief. He knew this victory wasn't won by one man alone, but by the persistence of a whole community, by the small voices that dared to speak, and by the courage of a single child. The press broke the news instantly, headlines flashing across screens. Grant, Miller, Doyle sentenced, Marcus Hale exonerated. Images from the courtroom spread rapidly, capturing the stark contrast. On one side, men who once believed they were untouchable now bowed in shackles. On the other, a man with a bruised face and eyes lit by the return of his honor. Major networks buzzed with analysis, calling it a turning point in the city's legal history, a reminder that no matter how long it hides, the truth always finds its way back. As Marcus stepped out of the courthouse, he was surrounded by a crowd of supporters. Chants of "Justice for Marcus, Justice for Zara" blended into a unified echo that filled the square. He didn't raise his hands or give a long speech, just bowed his head in thanks and placed a hand on Zara's shoulder, a quiet affirmation that this victory belonged to them both. In his eyes, she was no longer just a witness but the one who lit the flame that helped him stay standing. The heavy sentences for Grant, Miller, and Doyle didn't just close a case, they opened a new chapter. It sent a message that power cannot remain hidden forever, that a person's honor may be tarnished, but can still be restored when truth speaks. Marcus walked in the midday light, feeling each step no longer burdened, but carrying freedom, justice, and renewed faith. The day after the verdict, Zara's life changed in ways she had never dared to dream. A major educational foundation announced a full scholarship and long-term sponsorship for Zara, not only supporting her education but also committing to comprehensive care until adulthood. The announcement aired on national television, with images of the girl, eyes bright, face thin but glowing, moving millions. Standing on a small stage at the foundation's event, her hands tightly holding the certificate, her voice cracked with emotion as she gave thanks. She didn't say much, only promised to do her best, to live up to the trust of those who had protected her. This moment wasn't just a personal triumph for Zara, but a symbol of a turning point. Journalists wrote that she had stepped out of the shadows with her own voice, and the scholarship was proof that society still knows how to honor courage. Online, messages poured in from strangers across the country. "You've taught us a lesson in bravery. May you always keep that gaze, the one that made the world listen." Alongside the joy for Zara, the nation was swept into intense debate. From cafes to lecture halls, from social media forums to legislative chambers, people discussed the case as a test of justice. A single phrase echoed everywhere: justice can be delayed, but not erased. Analysts pointed out how, for months, Marcus was locked in a cell, Zara was forced to hide, and the truth seemed lost forever. But in the end, evidence surfaced, a witness stood brave, and justice returned stronger than before it was suppressed. Many editorials were published, stressing that no system can last if built on deception. Legal scholars called it a costly lesson, saying that society needs not only fair rulings, but also mechanisms to prevent abuse at its roots. Public forums were held where people asked, how many other truths are still imprisoned? How do we ensure there are no more Marcus or Zara left to scream in the streets? Marcus followed the developments from a distance. He didn't seek to appear frequently in the media, he only watched quietly. In one of his rare public statements, he said, "I don't see this as a personal victory. This is proof that even a child can shake the walls of power by daring to speak the truth." The quote spread widely, further reinforcing the argument that justice, though delayed, still finds its way back. Zara's image, from the girl curled up in the car to the one standing before the court, has now become a national symbol. Paintings of her, songs inspired by the story, and talk shows about children's courage began to emerge continuously. People look to Zara as a reminder that even when threatened, even when facing those who seem untouchable, the truth lives in the smallest voice. And in that voice, everyone could clearly hear a resounding message. Justice may be stalled in darkness, but no hand can erase it. The morning after all sentences had been delivered, Marcus sat alone in a quiet room, the mirror in front of him reflecting a face still marked by bruises. He reached up to touch the small scar at the corner of his mouth, where blood had once trickled after Grant's punch. The mark no longer throbbed, but each time he looked in the mirror, Marcus could still hear the cold insults from the men who once stood in front of his car, the crack of batons, and the mocking laughter that had taken his breath away. The wounds on his body would eventually heal, but the humiliation carved itself into his memory, a reminder that even the powerful can be dragged into the mud by abuse of authority. The room was bare, so silent that each tick of the clock rang out sharply. Marcus closed his eyes, letting himself drift into that silence, letting the memories rush back. He remembered the faces in the courtroom, remembered Zara trembling but resolutely testifying, and the deafening applause when justice was finally called by name. In that moment, he had seen both sides of life, brutal cruelty, and the redemptive light carried by small voices. It was the silence now that helped him grasp the true weight of that explosive moment, a silence filled with both pain and comfort. A soft knock on the door pulled Marcus back to the present. The door opened, and Zara stepped in, smiling brightly. She walked over with a small bouquet in hand, her eyes gleaming as if to banish every lingering shadow from his mind. Zara placed the flowers on the table, then sat in the chair across from him, her smile still as radiant as ever. She looked up, her voice soft but steady. "We really won." The simple sentence was enough to clear the heavy air. Marcus looked at her, and something inside him lifted, the heavy silence giving way to peace. He didn't respond right away, just smiled, letting the words echo in his heart. Zara's eyes now carried a confidence that was a far cry from the fear they once held. She had transformed through everything they'd endured. In her smile, Marcus saw his own redemption. He understood that the victory wasn't only in the sentence handed down to the guilty, but in the fact that a once-threatened child could now smile freely, believing that justice truly existed. Marcus gently placed his hand on Zara's shoulder, a silent thank you. In that quiet moment, he didn't need to say anything more, because her presence alone was the answer to all the pain he had lived through. The scar on his lip would remain, but it was no longer a mark of disgrace. It had become a symbol of resilience, of a battle he and Zara had survived together. And in Zara's eyes, shining with faith, Marcus knew his silence had finally been replaced with a voice of victory, a small voice strong enough to move an entire city. Zara sat across from him, her bright smile still lingering on her face, the words, "We really won," echoing like a sweet refrain in the otherwise quiet room. Marcus watched her for a long moment, his gaze softening, then gently shook his head. He leaned forward slightly, his voice low but clear. "No, justice won." The answer wasn't long or dramatic, but it cut straight to the heart of everything they had been through. Zara paused, her wide eyes fixed on him, then fell silent. She blinked a few times, as if that sentence had opened a new perspective for her. For a long time, this battle had felt like a fight between her and those who had threatened her, between Marcus and those who had tried to destroy him. But now she understood they had been defending something far greater than themselves, something larger than two fragile lives caught in a violent storm. Justice had prevailed, and because of that, they could sit here now, facing each other in peace. Marcus leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment to hold on to the precious quiet. He remembered the days in his cell, the stabbing pain of wounds, and the sting of humiliation. He remembered the moment he feared his name would be ruined forever, but all of it faded behind the image of Zara standing in court, shouting the truth, defying an entire system of power. His reply wasn't just to comfort her, it was to remind himself that personal victory was small compared to the survival of justice itself. Zara said nothing more, just sat quietly, her small hands folded together, her eyes shining but steady. She didn't need praise, didn't ask for promises. The only thing she had ever wanted was safety, the belief that her scream hadn't vanished into nothing. When Marcus said, "Justice won," she felt the burden on her shoulders shared. It was no longer her responsibility alone, it had become the strength of a society that had finally stood up. The room sank into silence. No cameras clicked, no keyboards tapped, no lights beamed down. Only two people remained, one weathered, one young but brave, looking at each other. In their gaze, no words were needed, because they both knew they had walked the same path. One of blood, tears, humiliation, and finally, restoration. No sentence could fully capture it, and it was the silence itself that made the moment eternal. Marcus smiled faintly, a rare smile that held no trace of strain. Zara smiled back, her pure expression lighting up the room. They looked at each other, letting the quiet stretch between them like a thread tying two distant souls. In Zara's eyes, Marcus saw an innocence that had never faded, even after all she had faced. In Marcus's eyes, Zara saw a man reborn from the wreckage not through wealth or power, but through the truth. Outside the window, the afternoon sky slowly faded into shades of sunset, soft red light slipping into the room, casting a warm glow over their faces. The world beyond remained noisy, full of news, arguments, and chaos, but in that moment, nothing could break through. The simple peace they shared was the most precious reward after everything. They sat there, quietly looking at each other, needing no more words, because they both understood that the fierce battle hadn't ended in despair. It ended with a simple truth. The truth can be silenced, but it cannot be erased, and when it returns, it carries the power of justice, lighting up even the souls once thought to be broken. After the trials that shook the city, Zara's name was no longer just that of a small witness but a symbol of courage. A school in the city sent an official invitation for her to speak to students about her experience. That day, the school's large auditorium was packed, young faces sitting silently, eyes fixed on the small wooden podium where Zara stood. She wore a simple dress, her face still a bit shy, but her eyes sparkled, and her voice carried the weight of everything she had been through. First, Zara's hands gripped the edge of her paper, trembling slightly, but when she saw hundreds of eyes locked on her with full attention, she took a deep breath and began to speak. She talked about that moment inside the car, when she saw the police officers approaching, and felt danger closing in. She talked about the sound of batons, the fear of being dragged onto the street, and the moment she had to yell "shut up" to save herself and Marcus. The students didn't take their eyes off her, some even covered their mouths as she shared painful details. But as she spoke, her voice grew steadier, because she didn't want to be looked at with pity, but with respect. Midway through her talk, Zara lifted her chin, her eyes sweeping the room, and said clearly, "Even a child has the right to say enough." The auditorium erupted into applause, so loud it drowned out the speakers. No one expected such simple yet powerful words from someone so young. That sentence was written down by the teachers, pinned to the school's message board, and quickly spread on social media as a new slogan. The students looked at Zara differently, not just as someone younger, but as a teacher in her own right. A younger boy stood and asked, "Weren't you scared when they were big and had weapons?" Zara smiled softly and answered that, of course, she was scared. But silence was far scarier, because silence means letting evil win. That answer sparked another wave of applause, and this time, not just the students, but the teachers nodded in agreement. The session lasted longer than expected, but no one wanted to leave. When Zara finished with a thank you, many students rushed up to shake her hand and give her little handmade cards, messy but full of heart. A girl slipped a drawing into Zara's hand, showing her standing in court, with the words scribbled across, "You're our hero." Zara blushed, but her eyes sparkled with joy. News of the talk quickly appeared in local papers. Images of a packed auditorium full of students clapping for a young girl spread widely, once again moving the public. People said that justice isn't only affirmed in courtrooms, but in every classroom, in every heart growing up alongside the truth. When Marcus heard the news, he sat in silence for a long while, then smiled. He understood that the victory wasn't just about clearing his name, but about the fact that Zara's voice had planted a seed of hope in the younger generation. From a girl who once hid in a church corner, fearing for her life, Zara now stood tall at a podium, delivering a message that forced society to listen. And in that moment, Marcus knew his scar would no longer symbolize shame, but would serve as a reminder that once justice is awakened, it spreads through every voice in the community. As those community voices echoed farther, Marcus decided not to stop at his own exoneration. He joined hands with his lawyer and several allies to establish a foundation called Shut Up for Justice. Inspired by Zara's brave shout that day, the launch event took place in a modest space, with no dazzling lights, but it was packed with attendees. Marcus stepped up to speak, eyes calm, voice deep and steady. "We chose this name not to glorify silence, but to remind people that sometimes silence is the only way to survive, and when the truth comes to light, justice must speak on behalf of those who were once forced to stay quiet." The room fell silent, then erupted into applause. Shut Up for Justice quickly gained support from individuals and organizations alike. Its mission went beyond helping victims of abuse by those in power. It offered legal aid, education, and protection for witnesses in sensitive cases. Zara, with her innocent smile and bright eyes, emerged as the Foundation's emblematic figure. People saw in her not just a child who survived, but living proof of the power of a small voice. The Foundation's creation sparked a widespread wave of public discourse. TV channels hosted panel discussions with themes like power and prejudice. Citizens debated why those tasked with protection could so easily abuse it, and how to build systems that are truly transparent. On university campuses, students wrote essays about the case as a prime example of resistance between ordinary citizens and institutional power. Online, countless threads emerged, circling around one core question: do we really live in a just society? Some emphasized that the problem wasn't just the actions of the three officers, Grant, Miller, and Doyle, but the entire system that enabled them. Others debated racial dynamics, pointing out that, without that factor, Marcus might never have been so easily made into a target. Social justice advocates called for sweeping reforms, from law enforcement training to the establishment of independent oversight mechanisms. Marcus followed the discussions with a thoughtful gaze. He didn't want to make himself the center of attention, but he understood the story had gone far beyond the personal. At a later press conference, he said, "This is no longer about me. This is about what we can change, so that no other Zara has to scream in the street, and no other Marcus gets vilified for simply existing differently." His words moved many, because they showed he hadn't just reclaimed his dignity, he had turned a bitter experience into fuel for change. Society began to reflect on itself. From ordinary families having dinner table conversations about justice and dignity, to lawmakers debating new policies to curb abuse of power, a shift was happening. Shut Up for Justice became more than just a support organization. It turned into a symbol of a movement, where people saw the link between personal pain and collective responsibility. In that current, both Zara and Marcus understood that justice is not an endpoint, but an ongoing journey. The wave of discussions didn't stop at coffee shops, social media forums, or classrooms. Public pressure grew so intense that the government was forced to act. A live press conference was held on national television, where a spokesperson announced a sweeping reform plan for the entire police force. A lengthy document was released, clearly outlining changes aimed at addressing abuse of power and rebuilding public trust. These were no longer vague promises this time. The government confirmed concrete, mandatory steps would be taken. The first major focus of reform was the creation of an independent oversight mechanism. A new committee, completely separate from the police system, was formed with the authority to access records, footage, and investigative data. Its members included representatives from human rights organizations, legal experts, and ordinary residents. The goal was to ensure that every public complaint would be transparently reviewed, no longer buried in closed-door meetings. The announcement brought a sense of relief to many, as for the first time since the incident, they felt the government was truly listening. Alongside that came another critical change. Anti-racism training would now be mandatory for the entire force. These courses wouldn't just last a few hours, but stretch over several weeks, involving psychologists, sociologists, and people who had personally suffered racial violence. The reform's message was clear: real change doesn't just come from policy, but from reshaping individual awareness across the institution. Major newspapers immediately covered the news, front-page headlines reading, "Government announces police reform, anti-racism training now mandatory." On TV, reporters interviewed citizens on the streets. Many said they felt trust was finally being restored. A young mother holding her child said, "I want my kid to grow up in a city where they're not afraid when they see a cop." An elderly man nodded. "There's still work to do, but at least this is a beginning." Marcus watched the press conference from afar, inside the new office of the Shut Up for Justice Foundation. Beside him, Zara sat attentively, her eyes lighting up when the phrase, "mandatory anti-racism training" came through. She turned to him and softly said, "So, my scream really could change the system." Marcus simply placed a hand on her shoulder, saying nothing, because he knew she had become living proof of what society was now moving toward. Real change sparked by voices once thought too small to matter. Everywhere, public discussion continued, not just about one case anymore, but about the future. Universities hosted seminars analyzing the reform's impact, while local community groups gathered to plan how they would help monitor its implementation. Social media is filled with a new slogan: "Justice doesn't stop at the court. It must live in the system." Each sentence, each post, stood as evidence that faith in change had taken root in the hearts of the people. Reform could not erase the wounds of the past, but it stood as a commitment that such mistakes would no longer be allowed to repeat. And for Marcus, for Zara, it was clear proof that their blood and tears had not been shed in vain. Justice had not only returned, it had left its mark on the structure of society, turning screams and scars into the foundation of a fairer system. When the government announced the comprehensive reform package, the Shut Up for Justice Foundation also entered a new phase of growth. Marcus, instead of returning to the multi-million-dollar deals that had once built his name, chose to dedicate most of his wealth to advancing the cause of change. He announced a multi-million-dollar contribution to the Reform Fund, not only to sustain legal aid for victims, but also to support anti-discrimination training and develop witness protection programs. The massive donation made headlines, and many expressed surprise that a CEO who once stood at the pinnacle of corporate power would willingly give up personal gain to invest in justice. But to Marcus, it was the only way to turn his pain into value for society. On the day of the National Reform Program's announcement, hundreds of guests, journalists, and representatives from human rights organizations gathered. On the main stage, Marcus sat in the front row, beside those who had stood by him in the fiercest part of the fight. And under the lights, Zara appeared as a guest speaker. She walked up to the podium, her legs still short but her steps steadier than before. The hall fell silent, everyone waiting for the words of the witness who had once forced a system to change. Zara stood at the microphone, her eyes scanning the crowd as if to make sure everyone was listening. She took a deep breath, then spoke in a voice clear and full of resolve. "I'm just a kid, but today I stand here because I've learned one thing. Anyone has the right to say enough." The room erupted in applause. Zara continued, her voice lightly trembling but steady, saying that she had once been so afraid she had to hide in a church, had once been threatened with chilling words, but thanks to the support and courage of an entire community, the truth had won. Her speech was simple, not dramatic, yet it brought many to tears. Camera lenses turned toward Marcus, his face firm, but his eyes glowing with pride. He knew that Zara's words in that moment were proof of everything they had been through, from humiliation, blood, and tears, to now, standing in the light to speak of justice. Zara was no longer just a witness, but the voice of a new generation. The press immediately published images of the event, splashed with headlines like, "From Child Witness to Justice Icon," "Marcus Hale Donates Millions," "Zara Collins Inspires at Reform Ceremony." Social media lit up with the new hashtag number, "Enough is Enough," attached to the image of Zara standing at the microphone, her eyes shining. Her words were quoted everywhere, becoming the slogan of a movement far bigger than the original case. As the ceremony ended, Zara stepped down from the podium to a wave of applause, and Marcus greeted her with a tight hug. He whispered that it was her voice that had changed the entire country, and that the millions he contributed were merely the next step in that journey. Two people, one old and one young, stood together in the middle of a cheering crowd, knowing they had planted important seeds for tomorrow, where justice would no longer be a distant concept, but a living presence in every community. One clear morning, Marcus stepped out of the foundation's office, after days of non-stop work. He walked along the same street that had once haunted him, where people used to whisper, point fingers, and deny his dignity with cold stares. Today, the atmosphere was completely different. There were no more cruel murmurs, no more suspicious glances. Instead, warm smiles appeared on the faces of passers-by. People paused to greet him, to nod as if to acknowledge that Marcus had endured it all with strength and truth. A street vendor recognized him and quickly pulled the scarf off her shoulder, smiling kindly. "You stood up, and we respect that." The simple words made Marcus feel more grounded than ever. He smiled back, a sense of both familiarity and strangeness rising in his chest. The streets that once seemed tainted were now bright, because he no longer had to bow his head when passing through them. He could walk tall, receiving the respect that had returned. In the hallway of a bookstore, a group of young people paused their conversation to greet him. A young woman said, her voice full of conviction, "We learned that no one is too small to stand against what's wrong. You're living proof." Marcus nodded slightly, wondering whether it was really him or Zara who had become the true inspiration. But he understood clearly that these greetings weren't just for him, but for a shared journey that had touched the heart of an entire society. A few steps farther, Marcus saw a young boy and his mother waiting at a crosswalk. When the boy locked eyes with him, he gently tugged his mother's hand and whispered, "Mom, that's the man who stood with the girl and told the truth." The mother turned to Marcus and nodded with deep respect. That moment tightened something in his throat, as if every pain he had endured had now turned into a profound emotional reward. Ordinary days slowly returned, but they no longer followed the same rhythm. Marcus still sat at his usual cafe, still read the paper every morning, but now he didn't shy away from the glances cast in his direction. The server placed a cup of coffee on his table and said softly but firmly, "We're proud to have you in this city." Marcus thanked him gently, then looked out the window at the everyday people walking by, and he realized that daily life could hold some of the quietest forms of greatness. This new normal wasn't about fame being restored, but about the peace of walking without the burden of doubt. Marcus knew life would go on, the work at the foundation would remain difficult, and the fight for justice would never truly end. But he also knew that just being greeted by people with a smile, with a phrase like, "You stood up," was proof enough that his efforts hadn't vanished into the void. In that moment, he felt peace return, and the long journey of blood and tears had finally opened into a new everyday life, where justice lived in every warm and knowing nod. That afternoon, after wrapping up a long meeting at the Foundation's office, Marcus decided to leave in the simplest way, walking along a sunlit street. Beside him, Zara skipped along, her small legs moving quickly, her hair glinting in the golden light of the late day. Her clear, joyful laughter echoed, spreading through the space, making even passers-by smile. Marcus looked at Zara, a rare sense of peace rising in his chest, as if life had finally returned to them something simple that once felt forever lost. Every so often, Zara turned back, holding out her hand as if to pull him into a faster pace. Marcus laughed, his leather shoes, long used to moving slowly, now hurrying to keep up with that youthful rhythm. The difference in age, in status, seemed to melt away, leaving only the image of a weathered man and a small girl walking side by side. People recognized them, some waved, others quietly lifted phones to capture the moment, but neither paid attention. They were simply enjoying the joy present in every breath. Marcus realized that Zara's laughter held more healing power than any speech or verdict. It pulled him away from memories of humiliation, from scars that hadn't fully faded, and reminded him that life could still shine if one held on to the truth. He didn't have to say it out loud, but in his heart, it was clear. Zara wasn't just the witness who saved him. She was the light that helped him believe in tomorrow again. A group of college students passed by, recognizing them instantly, and called out, "That's them, the symbol of justice." Zara turned and smiled, while Marcus simply nodded. In the eyes of the crowd, they were no longer a powerful CEO and an unknown child, but a pair forever connected by something unspoken. A CEO once dragged through the mud, a little girl who once trembled in a church corner, now walking together as living proof that justice isn't confined to courtrooms, but exists in everyday actions. Zara ran ahead a few more steps, then stopped and waited, her eyes bright with light. "You can't give up, okay?" she said. Marcus chuckled, placing a hand on her shoulder, replying gently but firmly, "We move forward together." The simple words carried all the faith in the world, a quiet promise that the thread connecting them would never break. That image, a grown CEO walking with a young black girl, quickly spread after a bystander snapped a photo. It appeared in the news under the caption, "The Thread of Justice." It became a new symbol, not of pain, but of renewal. People said justice doesn't always live in grand speeches, but in the way one man and one child walk forward together, holding on to the truth with steady steps and clear laughter. Marcus and Zara kept walking, letting the city wrap around them with its familiar sounds. Her laughter echoed ahead, his footsteps followed behind, blending together like music. And in that melody, both understood that the thread of justice had bound them together, a reminder to the world that, even when pushed down, justice will rise and walk alongside us. Late at night, when the city had gone quiet, Zara sat in her small room by the window, a desk lamp casting a soft yellow light over a blank sheet of paper. She opened the notebook gifted by the Scholarship Foundation and carefully began writing, each line formed with a child's handwriting but filled with determination. Her hand trembled slightly, but each sentence appeared clearly, as if she were not just recording her own story, but capturing the memory of an entire journey that had changed everything. On the very first page, Zara wrote in letters bigger than usual, "If I hadn't shouted that day, you'd have been done for." The sentence felt like both a confession and a reminder to herself that that shout had been the beginning of the truth coming to light. Zara continued writing, explaining that in that moment, she hadn't thought much. Her heart was pounding, her knees shaking, but she knew she had to do something. She admitted she was so terrified she could barely breathe, but Marcus's presence beside her gave her the courage to scream. With each line, her bottled-up emotions spilled out, sometimes with smudged ink from falling tears, sometimes in strokes pressed so hard they cut into the page. She wrote to release the weight inside, but also to affirm that the actions of a small child could shift an entire outcome that no adult had expected. Meanwhile, Back at the Foundation's office, Marcus sat alone beside a stack of unresolved files. The lawyer handed him a small envelope, saying Zara had asked for it to be delivered privately. He opened it to find a few neatly folded pages, the handwriting still clumsy but overflowing with feeling. Marcus read slowly, his eyes following each line, and when he reached the first sentence, "If I hadn't shouted that day, you'd have been done for," he let out a quiet laugh. It wasn't because it was funny, but because he realized that within that innocent phrasing was a simple truth. Sometimes, it's the smallest acts that save an entire life. Marcus leaned back in his chair, holding the pages for a long moment. He recalled the instant Zara screamed in the car, her tiny hands covering his mouth, her eyes glowing with fear and determination. Now, reading those words again, he felt a peace deeper than anything before. The journey filled with blood, humiliation, and pain had led them to this point, and he knew it had all started with a single scream. Marcus smiled, his eyes bright with gratitude, and gently placed the diary beside him like a treasured keepsake. Outside the window, moonlight bathed the sleeping city, calm in a way it hadn't been during the storm. Marcus softly closed the diary, whispering in reply to that first line, "But without you, justice wouldn't have won." He knew Zara would write many more pages about dreams, about fear, about hope, and he also knew that each of those pages would stand as proof that the truth always finds a way to endure, even in the trembling handwriting of a child. In that quiet moment, between a seasoned man and a brave little girl, the diary became a bond, needing no grand words, only sincerity. And in Marcus's faint smile, a chapter came to a close, making way for new pages where justice was no longer a distant dream, but a vivid story written by the very hands of those who dared to say enough. After reading each line of the diary, Marcus stayed silent for a long while, before gently folding it shut, his eyes turning towards Zara, who sat beside him. He saw her head lowered, her hands twisted together as if afraid her words had troubled him. Marcus smiled, placed a hand gently on her shoulder, and his warm voice broke the stillness of the room. "You're my hero." The simple sentence carried everything he could not express with lengthy words. It wasn't just recognition, but a deep gratitude from someone who had lost everything and had been handed back belief by a child. Zara looked up, her eyes wide, then turned red. She hadn't expected that someone once called a powerful CEO, once featured on magazine covers, and leading thousands of employees, would say that to her. A small smile appeared on Zara's lips, and in that moment, neither of them needed to say anything more. Marcus's eyes were full of pride, Zara's eyes sparkled with emotion, and the silence between them overflowed with connection. Just days later, the press picked up the story. A journalist close to the Foundation wrote a feature describing the moment Marcus placed his hand on Zara's shoulder and called her a hero. The article spread quickly, not only across the city, but nationwide. The accompanying photos, an older man beside a tiny girl, both smiling, were shared thousands of times. Headlines like, "A CEO calls a child a hero," appeared on the front pages of major newspapers, striking a powerful chord. On social media, millions of comments expressed admiration. People said the public had never needed a story like this more than now. The story of a small child who shook an entire power structure. The story of a man who seemed to have lost everything, yet found hope in an innocent heart. Many users wrote, "Heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they're just a girl who dares to scream the truth." Television programs invited experts to weigh in. They explained that Marcus's words weren't just meant for Zara, but were a message to society. Value the voices of the small, because sometimes they hold the key to change. Children were taught about the story in classrooms as a lesson in courage. Teachers wrote the sentence, "You're my hero," on the board for students to discuss. Marcus watched all the reactions with calm composure. He didn't see it as a display, but as an opportunity for people to understand that real strength doesn't lie in money or status, but in truth and courage. Zara, when she saw her name in the papers, looked momentarily flustered, then smiled. She didn't like being called a hero, but knew that if her story could move millions of hearts, then that was the best way for justice to keep living in society. In their small room, Marcus and Zara continued their simple routines as before, but the world outside had changed. They were no longer just two people caught in a cruel storm of injustice, but had become symbols. And from that simple sentence, a wave of belief spread, reminding everyone that justice can begin with a child's scream, and that sometimes, it is the smallest heroes who truly keep the light alive for an entire community. On the day of the verdict, the courtroom was packed so tightly that many people had to stand shoulder to shoulder in the hallway just to hear the outcome. The bright white lights glared, and the air was so heavy it felt like each breath carried weight. The judge read from an indictment dozens of pages long, his voice deep and steady, each word falling like a hammer blow against the wall of lies that had hung over the city for so long. As he listed the charges: assault, fabricated evidence, abuse of power, every eye turned to Grant, Miller, and Doyle. The three men who once stood so arrogantly in public now lowered their heads, faces pale and drained, all arrogance gone. The prison sentences were announced, each name tied to years that felt like chains, drawing murmurs of outrage and grim satisfaction from the room. Grant, who had struck Marcus and ordered the assault on Zara, received the harshest sentence, linked to multiple accusations uncovered by other witnesses. Miller, responsible for editing and spreading the deceptive footage, was also sentenced heavily, along with a ban from ever holding a public position again. Doyle, who had dragged Zara to the ground and laughed while she was in pain, received a punishment no less severe. The final bang of the judge's gavel marked the end of their grip on the truth. Marcus sat in the gallery, eyes slowly closing, as if to absorb every moment. He heard each word: sentence, imprisonment, abuse of power, and felt a release deep in his chest. The dark days, the fists, the humiliation, and the public doubt were now wiped away by the law's recognition. When the judge moved on to declare Marcus fully acquitted, the courtroom erupted in applause. He was declared innocent, his trampled dignity restored. In that moment, Marcus raised his head not in triumph, but to receive the light of justice after so many days in the dark. Zara sat in the witness row, her eyes shining but calm. She gave a small smile when Marcus's name was cleared, as if confirming that her scream that day had not been in vain. Marcus's lawyer bowed his head too, his expression a blend of solemnity and relief. He knew this victory wasn't won by one man alone, but by the persistence of a whole community, by the small voices that dared to speak, and by the courage of a single child. The press broke the news instantly, headlines flashing across screens. Grant, Miller, Doyle sentenced, Marcus Hale exonerated. Images from the courtroom spread rapidly, capturing the stark contrast on one side. Men who once believed they were untouchable now bowed in shackles. On the other, a man with a bruised face and eyes lit by the return of his honor. Major networks buzzed with analysis, calling it a turning point in the city's legal history. A reminder that no matter how long it hides, the truth always finds its way back. As Marcus stepped out of the courthouse, he was surrounded by a crowd of supporters. Chants of "Justice for Marcus," "Justice for Zara," blended into a unified echo that filled the square. He didn't raise his hands or give a long speech, just bowed his head in thanks and placed a hand on Zara's shoulder. A quiet affirmation that this victory belonged to them both. In his eyes, she was no longer just a witness but the one who lit the flame that helped him stay standing. The heavy sentences for Grant, Miller, and Doyle didn't just close a case, they opened a new chapter. It sent a message that power cannot remain hidden forever, that a person's honor may be tarnished, but can still be restored when truth speaks. Marcus walked in the midday light, feeling each step no longer burdened, but carrying freedom, justice, and renewed faith. The day after the verdict, Zara's life changed in ways she had never dared to dream. A major educational foundation announced a full scholarship and long-term sponsorship for Zara, not only supporting her education but also committing to comprehensive care until adulthood. The announcement aired on national television, with images of the girl, eyes bright, face thin but glowing, moving millions. Standing on a small stage at the foundation's event, her hands tightly holding the certificate, her voice cracked with emotion as she gave thanks. She didn't say much, only promised to do her best, to live up to the trust of those who had protected her. This moment wasn't just a personal triumph for Zara, but a symbol of a turning point. Journalists wrote that she had stepped out of the shadows with her own voice, and the scholarship was proof that society still knows how to honor courage. Online, messages poured in from strangers across the country. "You've taught us a lesson in bravery. May you always keep that gaze, the one that made the world listen." Alongside the joy for Zara, the nation was swept into intense debate. From cafes to lecture halls, from social media forums to legislative chambers, people discussed the case as a test of justice. A single phrase echoed everywhere: justice can be delayed, but not erased. Analysts pointed out how, for months, Marcus was locked in a cell, Zara was forced to hide, and the truth seemed lost forever. But in the end, evidence surfaced. A witness stood brave, and justice returned stronger than before it was suppressed. Many editorials were published, stressing that no system can last if built on deception. Legal scholars called it a costly lesson, saying that society needs not only fair rulings, but also mechanisms to prevent abuse at its roots. Public forums were held where people asked, how many other truths are still imprisoned? How do we ensure there are no more Marcus or Zara left to scream in the streets? Marcus followed the developments from a distance. He didn't seek to appear frequently in the media. He only watched quietly. In one of his rare public statements, he said, I don't see this as a personal victory. This is proof that even a child can shake the walls of power by daring to speak the truth. The quote spread widely, further reinforcing the argument that justice, though delayed, still finds its way back. Zara's image, from the girl curled up in the car to the one standing before the court, has now become a national symbol. Paintings of her, songs inspired by the story, and talk shows about children's courage began to emerge continuously. People look to Zara as a reminder that even when threatened, even when facing those who seem untouchable, the truth lives in the smallest voice. And in that voice, everyone could clearly hear a resounding message. Justice may be stalled in darkness, but no hand can erase it. Dusk settled, and the sky tinged golden across the treetops lining the park path. Marcus and Zara chose a simple stone bench near the lake, where the water reflected the fading sunlight like shimmering silver. There were no camera lenses, no roaring applause, only two people who had weathered the storm now sitting in quiet. A soft breeze carried the scent of fresh grass and wildflowers, creating a rare calm after days of upheaval. Marcus leaned back, eyes gazing toward the horizon, where the red glow slowly deepened into purple. He felt a rare peace, as if the world had finally paused long enough to let him breathe. Beside him, Zara swung her legs gently, eyes following the birds soaring above. She had grown up in many ways, yet in this moment, her innocence remained intact. The very innocence Marcus once feared would be crushed by a harsh world. They didn't speak for a long while. The silence wasn't awkward, but natural, as if no more words were needed between them. All that had been said in court, all the messages delivered on grand stages, now faded into the wind and steady heartbeats. Marcus glanced at Zara, her face glowing in the sunset, and smiled. He realized that some victories didn't need cheers. Only a quiet evening to know justice had taken root. Zara turned, catching his gaze, then smiled back in reply. No longer trembling, that smile now held the strength of someone who had dared to speak. She didn't ask about the future or revisit the past, but simply lived in the moment. In her small heart, Zara knew the journey wasn't over, but she also knew she was no longer alone. The sun dipped lower, the city lights flickered on, but on that stone bench in the park, the world stayed still. Marcus placed his hand on the edge of the bench and softly said, "Tomorrow will bring many things, but today, this is enough." Zara nodded, eyes shimmering, then rested her head on his shoulder. They sat like that, letting the quiet surround them, letting nature's breath become the soundtrack of an ending. It wasn't a final stop, but a doorway to what came next. Justice had prevailed in one battle, but many more remained, with many more voices yet to be heard. Marcus and Zara were just two among them, but they had proven that truth could reshape an entire society. That sunset became a testament to one lasting message. Justice doesn't end in a courtroom, it lives on in everyone who dares to stand tall. And in that rare, quiet afternoon, beneath a clear sky and gentle breeze, a man who had once lost everything, and a girl who had once been threatened, now sat side by side, silent yet proud. The end of the story turned out not to be a conclusion, but a reminder that once the truth is spoken, it will echo far beyond the roads ahead. In the vivid red of the sunset, as the last rays of light faded across the still lake, Zara tilted her head slightly, a mischievous smile playing on her lips. She looked at Marcus, her eyes filled with a rare sense of peace after days of relentless trials, then whispered, "Shut up this time, to enjoy the calm." The words made Marcus laugh not because they were witty, but because he realized the child who once shouted to save his life had now found a way to use that very phrase to close a turbulent chapter. "Shut up," once a desperate cry, had become an invitation to embrace silence, to listen to peace, to treasure a moment free from violence and hatred. Marcus didn't respond right away. He simply nodded, eyes fixed on the deepening purple of the sky. In his heart, that phrase connected every memory: the moment he was dragged from the car, the cruel blows, the sharp cry from Zara slicing through the web of lies. Now, it all converged in a soft smile and a quiet whisper. The silence Zara spoke of no longer carried fear, but became the final reward for those who dared to walk through darkness in search of light. A gentle breeze passed through the trees, Ripples shimmered across the lake, and the two of them sat like travelers who had reached the end of a journey, savoring a moment with no need to argue or prove anything. There were no cameras surrounding them, no demands for statements, no scornful gazes to endure. Just two people, one grown, one still young, sharing a silence more precious than words. Their story, from its unjust beginning to its resounding victory, now closed within this simple scene. But the echoes it left behind were far from small. Across the country, people still spoke of the case as a symbol of power reversed, those once standing at the top forced to kneel before justice, and a child once thought powerless becoming the voice of salvation. The story had passed, yet it lived on in every conversation, every lesson taught, every photo hung on classroom walls. Marcus and Zara could choose silence in this moment, but society would not forget. Reforms had been announced, anti-bias trainings were underway, and public discourse continued. All of it traced back to that single scream and the truth that could not be hidden. When Zara smiled softly with that simple phrase, she turned, "Shut up," into a gentle punctuation mark, ending her chapter quietly, but leaving space for the next generation to continue writing. And then, as night slowly descended over the park, the two of them remained seated side by side, no more words needed. Outside, the public continued to speak their names, but within them, only peace remained. The story closed, not with the noise it began with, but with a profound silence. The echo of that shift in power would endure, as a reminder that justice may come late, but once it speaks, it resounds beyond the boundaries of time. The story of Marcus Hale and Zara Collins ended in the quiet setting of a park, but its resonance didn't stop at one sunset. It was a long journey from the depths of injustice to the moment justice was illuminated, a testament that even the smallest acts can shift the weight of an entire system. To truly grasp its meaning, one must look back at the path they walked, from a beginning marked by helplessness to the moment they became symbols. Marcus, a successful CEO, stepped into the car with the confidence of someone leading a powerful company. But in an instant, everything unraveled when a strange black girl suddenly covered his mouth and whispered a warning. That was the moment Zara appeared, not as a random child, but as a spark in overwhelming darkness. Abusive officers arrived, using humiliation and violence to fabricate a false narrative, turning Marcus into a criminal in the public eye. Zara was dragged away, Marcus beaten, and the lies spread quickly through edited video clips. From that point, they were swept into a storm of public opinion. The media, social networks, and baseless accusations turned Marcus from a respected figure into a mockery, while Zara vanished in fear. But the truth didn't stay buried. One by one, the missing pieces emerged. Past victims spoke up. A young officer confessed. Original footage and recordings surfaced. Each revelation cut into the wall of deceit, cracking it day by day. Above all, Zara's return to testify in court shattered every falsehood. When the verdict was delivered, Grant, Miller, and Doyle received long sentences, and Marcus was acquitted, his name cleared. But the victory didn't end there. Zara received a long-term scholarship. Marcus founded the Shut Up for Justice Fund, and society began a deeper conversation about fairness, bias, and civic responsibility. The government announced police reform, making anti-discrimination training mandatory. What had once been private wounds became the driving force behind systemic change. From a CEO who seemed to fall, Marcus became someone who planted seeds of transformation. From a child hiding in a church, Zara grew into a young woman standing before Congress, declaring, "The truth is the strongest weapon." That sentence didn't just define their story. It became a rallying cry across society, reminding everyone that justice is not an abstract ideal. Books chronicling their journey sold millions, translated into many languages, inspiring those who once believed they were too small to speak up. What mattered most was how the two of them found peace in the end. They didn't choose the spotlight, but chose to sit together and enjoy the quiet. When Zara smiled softly and said, "Shut up this time to enjoy the peace," it was a gentle closing to a story once full of storms. It affirmed that victory isn't only found in the cheers of courtrooms or Congress, but also in the ability to sit beside one another in calm after all the pain. From their story came many lessons that could inspire anyone. First, it showed that truth can be distorted, but never erased. No matter how quickly edited clips spread, no matter how loud the accusations, as long as someone dares to speak up, the truth will always find its way back. Zara proved that sometimes strength doesn't come from power or age, but from the courage to speak a simple word in a life or death moment. The second lesson is that justice cannot exist only on paper, it must be nurtured through action. Marcus understood that to keep the story from repeating, concrete steps were needed, creating a fund for victims, supporting reform, and sharing his experience. He didn't stop at clearing his name, but turned his painful experience into a resource for social change. It's a reminder that personal victories only gain meaning when they open the path for others. The third lesson comes from the power of solidarity. Either Marcus or Zara could have fallen if they had been alone, But they leaned on each other. Zara's shout saved Marcus, and Marcus's recognition gave Zara the belief that her voice mattered. That bond didn't just connect two people, it connected a community, creating the strength that forced those in power to bow their heads. Finally, the story emphasizes that justice is not a destination, but a continuous journey. The sentencing of the guilty officers was just one part, and the reforms were only the beginning. What truly matters is that each person holds on to the belief that fairness can be defended if we dare to speak, dare to act. Justice may come late, but when it arrives, it carries the weight to change an entire society. So when looking back on this journey, what remains is not just pride for Marcus and Zara, but a message for each of us. Don't think you're too small to change something, because even a child shouting "shut up" can open the way for justice. Don't underestimate the power of truth, because it is the strongest weapon. And don't forget that after the storms, the simplest peace is the well-earned reward for those who've walked through darkness. The story closes on a park bench, but its echo reaches far. It is the echo of power reversed, of a system forced to bow before the truth, and of the belief that justice always finds a way to exist. Marcus and Zara stepped into that chapter of history as symbols, and they left the world with a lesson. Justice is not a dream, it is something we can reach if we dare to believe, dare to speak, and dare to act.